equipping participants to integrate anti-racism into workplace, policies, and advocacies at large. In order to do that, we will be looking at an agenda. So first, we'll have an opening by ENAR and by the ENAR Foundation. Then we will look at the first panel where we are going to try to understand a bit better what is misinformation, what is disinformation, and most importantly, how to fight it. Then we'll have a 10-minute break. We'll go on to a keynote by Dr. Raki Kasi, on countering DEI fatigue and resistance. We'll have another break, and then eventually we'll look at a panel on what is the future of DEI. What do we do with DEI in the next 10 years, in the next 5 years? What are the things that we're going to hopefully develop so that it becomes more and more sustainable? And eventually, we'll be having a closing. Katalin, would you like to say a few words, please?
Thank you very much, Safir, and good morning to everybody. I'm really happy to see everybody here, and I'm grateful that all of you took the time and made the effort to be present in this space. As I'm sure you're aware, this is a moment marked by both urgency and the need for resistance. This is the unfortunate environment we are working now. But even if this is a challenging time, I feel that there is so much around us where we can celebrate and build on. And I think the efforts that all of you are making within your organizations, the effort that Safir is making within the Spark community, the work that Lina is doing with Equal at Work and within the broader framework of the policy advocacy that the European Network Against Racism are doing, are all ways that can bring racialized voices together, bring together lived experiences in order to make the changes that need to be done. At the same time, I want to share a few reflections coming from a more, let's say, philanthropic institution that the ENAR Foundation is. And there are some, we can call it action points for all of us in the professions and in the organizations where we work. The first one is to stay deeply connected to grassroots organizations. It's not only that they are an extremely valuable resources that are working on the front lines under extremely difficult conditions, but they also need our support, and they need our support as practitioners, but they can also need the support of the institutions where we're working in. And there is an amazing amount of work that the institutions and organizations and companies where you're working in could do to support these organizations. We can all also leverage our institutional power for a wider change that we want to achieve. Our organizations have influence. We can use that influence to advocate for equitable policies. We can use it to push back against misinformation that harms people, and we can use it to model accountability. Last but not least, I would like us all to invest in each other's resilience. This can be done through simple care. This can be done through simple being present for each of us. But it can also be done through our endurance, because this is something that's needed, and our movement needs all of you well and centered. I can only wish you a wonderful day, and I'm sure that everybody here will contribute to this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katalin, for those beautiful words. Lina, would you like to say something from ENAR Association and Equal at Work?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I will be short and sweet. I think Safir and Katalin have said a lot already, and there's a lot to be said still today. But thank you for organizing and bringing us together for the first part of this day. What I would add, I guess, to what's been said, is that from a policy perspective, from a community organizing, grassroots organizing perspective, this discussion comes at a crucial moment. Just yesterday, the EU anti-racism strategy was released by the European Commission, and it falls short on what so many of us in civil society and underground have been calling for. So clear political ambition, binding commitments, strong mechanisms for enforcement and accountability of already existing mechanisms. And it does not name the violence that our communities are living in Europe today. And employment settings are one of the sites for racial violence. So when we talk of a context of growing backlash against DEI, of course, we're talking of a more global backlash, and for lack of a better word right now. And in this context, this gap between the rhetoric and the action is precisely why those sort of conversations matter and can be uh, weaponized in the good sense of the word by us to reaffirm that anti-racism, sorry, it's a bit early for me, that anti-racism is not just a buzzword, but that it should be explicit, that it's naming a violence, and that working to dismantle this violence means having a resourced movement, means working and speaking structurally, and means that civil society and workers and affected people's voices should always be centered and be monitoring the policies that we're discussing and will be discussing right now. That all of this remains at the core of policy implementation, because policy should reflect the lived realities of the people we're discussing in those circles. So that's why I'm very happy to have been a part of this process led by Safir, because I know that those voices are being centered. And yes, I'm very much looking forward to the conversations and the strategies, the concrete strategies that we can explore yet together today. Thank you, everyone, and wish you a good conversation.
Thank you so much, Lina. Thank you so much, Catalin, for those nice words. I am so grateful that we had the opportunity to do this webinar, and already we have tackled a lot of points, anti-racism needing to be structural, for instance, and I am so excited to dive even deeper. So thank you to the both of you, and thanks to everyone for attending and participating today. Let's go on to the first panel, where we will be speaking about fighting misinformation. And in order to do so, we'll have Ndela, who is a journalist and author, who will bring on a lot of expertise from a lot of different countries. Ndela, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Sure, thank you, and hi everyone. I'm a journalist, an author, as said. I'm currently based in Finland, but I've lived in Belgium and the UK, among other countries. And yeah, I'm excited to be here today.
Thank you so much, Nela. We also have Angeline, who is an international educator, author, consultant, and pedagogical leader. Angeline, would you like to say a few words as well?
Thank you, Safir, and the ENAR Foundation for this opportunity and warm welcome. Hi, everybody. I'm Angeline. My pronouns are she, her. I am a Chinese Australian based here in Berlin, and I work with a lot of schools to help them become more inclusive. My area of expertise is around intercultural learning and anti-racism, and I look forward to sharing my perspectives here with you today.
Thank you so much, Angeline. And last but not least, we have Jamel, who is an essayist, poet, film director, and a lot of other things. Would you like to say a few words as well?
Hi everyone. Thank you, Sophia. So I am Jamal. I am a French Moroccan Muslim essayist. I'm a poet and I'm a film director. I'm based in Paris. My pronouns are he, him. I'm also a DEI consultant, practitioner, and keynote speaker, a human rights activist, and I raise my voice on a daily basis against inequalities and any type of discrimination. I'm also the author of a book called Love, Amour in French, a book on how we can learn from Islamic and Arab cultures to rethink our conceptions of love. And yeah, very happy to be here.
Thank you so much, Jamal. And I am Sophia Bouhalfa. I am on top of being the Spark DEI chair, a founder and executive director in my own DEI firm. And I am so excited to have that conversation today. So thank you to the three of you for partaking. Let's dive in. So my first question is going to be about what does fake news or misinformation targeting anti-racism and DEI most commonly look like today in public discourse and in our societies at large? And to answer that question, I would love to ask Ndela first. Could you please tell us?
Sure. First, I thought it might be good to just clarify what we mean by misinformation and disinformation. So, misinformation is usually thought to be unintentional. So, it's just people sharing content online that they come across. Maybe it's something they honestly believe is true and they unintentionally share it. Whereas disinformation is deliberate, it's intentional, and it has usually either a political motive, a commercial motive, or it can be a powerful tool in creating either behavioral change or shifting public opinion. And so fake news and propaganda is part of disinformation. And I think COVID really saw the kind of mass spread of disinformation, but it's obviously been used even before that. And especially election times are particularly vulnerable for that. And it's used by a lot of political actors. And the tactics used often include AI-generated images or deep fake videos, as well as these kind of troll factories where internet trolls either spread the disinformation or they generate bots that will kind of drive engagement through sharing a number of posts across social media platforms. And then in terms of, because of the high level of engagement, it often then feeds the algorithm and can actually start to impact media algorithms. What else should I say? It is used in particular by the far right. There was a Dutch study that looked at 26 different countries. They found that overwhelmingly it was far right populist MPs who share fake news on social media, as opposed to either mainstream or whatever parties or left-wing politicians. But I would also like to highlight that the media itself, although the media is often fake news and disinformation is often used to discredit kind of legacy news media and like big media institutions. But as with all disinformation, I do think there is an element of truth in it. So the media can also be complicit in sharing wrong information. For example, the extremely horrific and unfortunate story of Hamas beheading babies, which were the media was just repeating completely fabricated claims. They were not verified, which end up then being, reproduced by Biden saying he saw pictures, and then this kind of fueled the whole narrative and essentially laid the groundwork for manufacturing consent for the genocide of Palestinians by Israel. And yeah, I would say that disinformation is fueled by and it's able to thrive because of this very blurred boundary between facts and opinions. It seems that people are often not exactly clear on what that is, and what that means in terms of journalistic practice. And then I also personally am growing very, very concerned about the blurring between social media influencers and journalists. And this is called the post-truth era, which in itself is horrifying. And obviously, despite this is all happening in the virtual world, it has very real consequences in the real world, namely on vulnerable communities at the forefront of it, as well as marginalized people. And yes, I think I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you so much, Nila. To be honest, I could listen to you speaking for hours. I think it's so interesting what you're bringing to the conversation, and I think it's really, really good that you defined also the differences between misinformation and disinformation and the willingness, and that's pretty interesting. Angeline, I would love to hear also, do you have anything to add, or is there any other way you would like to answer the question, maybe?
Yeah, sure. I think Adela, really you articulated, what's happening on a global scale with like media and its power to reach so many. And I think for me in schools, like there's something you mentioned about truth, right? And so I think from truth is something that's so subjective and it just depends on everyone's interpretation of that, and the blurring between fact and truth and this post-truth era that we're in that you mentioned as well, which I agree is very scary. And so I just also want to bring us back to this kind of community ground level, where I think as human beings always have this desire to share stories. And when we hear unfinished stories or just like one perspective of a story, people like to just, replace what they don't know with assumptions, right? And then it starts. And so like, and it can start with another child saying something about one other child, and then all of a sudden that circulates, and this meant this, whether it's the deliberate or unintentional, this idea, the harm is there. And it's already, then the harm is out there, and it's so hard to kind of retract. So some mistruth that can turn into a story that will stay with you and kind of inform how you will view your schooling experience again, because it has become a part of someone's identity. And I think it can even start there, at a very kind of like one-to-one community level, where we have people with a strong desire to share stories and to make connections. Sometimes making connection can also other another group in that way, and it is very and when we don't have that kind of accountability at a school level for that, then all of a sudden, like, you can see it perpetuated into society. Society's are a reflection of society, and but we also have the power in schools to shape it too. And so that's where I feel like with a lot of this, fake news and misinformation targeting anti-racism and DEI, we need to take that responsibility to look at how we can shift the public discourse by having people suspend judgment on a lot of stories, and to have feed into a lot of different narratives, and to expose people to more perspectives as well.
Thank you, Angeline. Love also that dimension that truth is very subjective, and it's really important to have more and more perspectives to understand. Often recommend to people to look at news also from different angles and from different countries. Now you have access to a lot of translating tools. So it's kind of interesting to look at the news, how it's conveyed from maybe Russia, from China, from Nigeria, from Brazil, to also try to see, okay, is there any kind of truth in there? Is there anything that can be as close as possible to something that is factual, even though facts, as we know, are quite easy to interpret and manipulate as well. I really love that, Angeline. Thank you so much. Jamal, would you like to add something?
Sure. Well, I'll start by quoting the brilliant Toni Morrison. I just thought of what she used to say, hearing Della and Angeline talking. Um, she used to say the very serious function of racism is distraction, because it keeps you from doing your work. It keeps you explaining over and over again your reason of being. And so I feel like I indeed spend my whole life um, centering anti-racism in DEI work in a country where race is almost a swear word, is almost a profanity. And my whole work is around myth busting and debunking stereotypes from, for example, my podcast, Jins, which is the very first podcast worldwide in French and in English, that addresses love, sexualities, and gender for Arabs and or Muslims. And from my short videos on my social media pages to my LinkedIn posts, my books or my keynotes, I underline the fact that DI and anti-racism within DI has been reframed as like a ministry of truth, basically, as if asking for dignity at work is like becoming some kind of statewide authority. But that framing is what flips reality upside down for me. And DI, for me, is not at all policing of thought. It's the protection of equal access to opportunities. So the paradox here is that the loudest defenders of free speech often want a world where only the dominant feel free to speak. And one of the most convenient distortions of anti-racism is the comeback of, amongst others, anti-white racism, as if structural inequalities were just individual insults thrown in reverse. So it hides the fact that structural racism is a very well-rounded architecture for white supremacy, basically. So we live, yes, as Angeline just said, we live in the post-truth era, and in France especially, we have a cultural obsession with a certain idea of neutrality that for me I'd rather call neutralization than neutrality. It's like be yourself, but not too visibly. You can belong, but don't remind us you're different. Um, Yet we all know workplaces and schools are not neutral. They are already having norms that are applied there. They're just presented as universal and neutral, which means white, basically. And all of that lands so effectively online because misinformation is designed to travel quickly. We have robust research today showing very thoroughly that false news can diffuse faster, farther, more broadly than truth on social network. That obviously there is a structural kind of news and media that are being monopolized by channels that makes it even quicker. So if you ask me what it most commonly looks like for me on my social media platforms, on my work to counter anti-Black racism in France, Islamophobia, the narrative against the genocide of the Palestinian people, for instance, it looks like emotional re-engineering, basically. It takes complex questions of racism, inequality, and power, and it compresses it um, into slogans that trigger fear, that trigger resentment, that trigger a fantasy of a lost order. So I would say, yeah, that misinformation really doesn't just destroy DEI by proving it wrong, it destroys it by making it look ridiculous. And if you can make social justice look ridiculous, you don't even need to argue against it anymore. In this context, it's being mocked, and it's like you cannot even fight with real academic research or arguments that are deeply rooted in facts. And which makes me think, to end up on this, is another quote that pops up into my mind by Black lesbian poetess Audre Lorde, who used to say, "The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house." So they may allow us temporarily to beat him or them at their own game, but they will never enable us to bring about genuine change. And what we need today, and this is also my kind of discourse, is love as a revolutionary kind of change in the way that we frame our speech and discourse and online presence, reframe it totally outside of the supremacist, racist, and actual too white friendly kind of discourse, to rethink the ways we fight racism.
Thank you, Gemma. I find it really interesting because you brought a bit earlier that dimension of like emotions and what information does emotionally to the people. And I would love to know, now that we know a bit more what it is that we're speaking about, what is disinformation, what is misinformation, what are fake news, I'd love to know from you as well. Which narratives about DEI are most frequently manipulated or deliberately misrepresented to trigger those emotions? Fear, resentment, or maybe even moral panic? And to answer that question, I would love to hear Angeline first.
Yeah, I think Jamal mentioned quite a lot of that emotion that was coming up, as you mentioned, and yeah, and actually it was Nadella who first brought up the post-truth era. I want to give credit there. And but regarding your question, I think for me, I think the most harmful misinformation that is out there is that there is a normal, and that there is a typical thing that we need to strive for. And then anything that kind of is that, I mean, my 11-year-old will tell you that actually normal doesn't exist. So there are parts of schooling that is trying to correct this and sort of say, what is typical, because as soon as you then put into place a service, for example, you're trying to provide every student is different and they have different needs, and they're going to need a different pathway to learning. And so as soon as you kind of provide a service that is within the school, to perhaps have them have a different strategy and a little bit of extra time to complete a test, etc., there is this narrative that is out there that this is unfair. And and so this misinformation about fairness, equality, and the different people's misunderstanding of equity and is really damaging, because it creates this panic of like, well, my child didn't get that, so why does your child get this, right? But actually, it's about everyone getting what they need, not this persistent narrative that everyone gets the same thing. And because there's this misconception that everyone has the same starting point, and so it creates this like kind of fear. I think that feeds things like the anti-white racism thing, or and so there is also this scarcity mindset that's out there, and that gets perpetuated all the time too. That, well, if someone gets something, well, then we don't have this, right? And well, okay, I think in severely underfunded areas like education or health, and a lot of the care services that are, very not well paid and understaffed, etc. Well, yeah, the scarcity is actually created by you and the systems that's spending so much money doing other things like funding wars, right? So, and so, yeah, but the media perpetuates it as like actually there's a scarcity in this one very small pool. And yes, we don't have a lot of resources, but everyone's going to get what they need. And if we don't have this misinformation that when someone gets something different, that it's unfair. And I think that can underpin so much of what is out there.
Brilliant as well. Thank you so much, Angeline. I love that we hear often this scarcity mindset in individuals. We hear that we need abundance, we need this, we need that, and I love that you brought it to much broader, like structural level as well, because this is definitely that has become a tool, right? We tell our populations that we don't have money, but on the side we're funding wars, we're funding a lot of different things. So it's really interesting to see it a bit more at like the structural and institutional levels as well. Thank you so much. I'd love to hear from Jamal on the question as well, or maybe you have something to add to Angeline's answer.
Sure. Yeah, I would say France is almost a laboratory for DI moral panic. Here they also say we already achieved equality. DI is just like giving out extra privileges for minorities. But this again confuses equality with equity. As Angeline just said, if you treat everyone the same in an unequal system, you don't create fairness, you just reproduce injustice. So in France, um, we can't even whip out the word race anywhere because talking about race creates racism, according to them. The word is being erased from all corporations, but also from the very constitution in France. So this way, um, that's a very convenient kind of magic. They say if race doesn't exist, then racism can't exist either, you know? So the thing is, silence and erasure doesn't neutralize reality. It simply protects the status quo of racism. So silence doesn't remove tension, it just pushes the tension into microaggressions, passive aggression, disengagement. And how we frame DI in France is also a problem because portraying DI as activism rather than governance or organization makes every corporation feel uncomfortable, but not just. And I've been systematically told during my keynotes to hold my horses when it comes to defending what's right in companies, because the worst case scenario would be to be seen as an activist in the corporate world. Yet, for me, DI is fundamentally about risk management, about talent retention, about compliance with anti-discrimination laws, and a very healthy organization. So it's beneficial for the organizations. It's not just that it's a vibe or it's just like something I love to do. It's infrastructural. So in France, the moral panic is also very much centering and hinging upon the word woke, because woke becomes this floating enemy in the air. It means basically anything that asks me to question not even my privilege, but my comfort. And in the French media ecosystem, woke is frequently used as a shortcut to basically target Muslims, BIPOC, queer people, feminists of all kinds, and anyone who complicates the fantasy of a single universal identity that is set in stone. So we see that in the way cultural wars are fueled and amplified by powerful all day long news media networks and by the concentration of influence by the far right. So woke became an ideology rather than just like an awakening, and everyone is naming it now wokeism instead of just being woke. So we also often hear of the word the French right has coined Islamo-gauchisme in French, which basically um, means Islamo-leftism in English. And because my work intersects with religion and race, I'll be very direct. Islamophobia is one of the easiest catalyzers of DEI panic in France. It operates through what we can call an identity shortcut. Because the headscarf, for instance, even the beard now, is treated as if it were a complete biography for Muslim people, and specifically Muslim women, and even more specifically Muslim women who wear a headscarf. So you're not seen as an employee with skills, or as like an individual, as a person. You're seen as a symbol to be debated, to be invisibilized, to be banished from society. And data today from research, even if we don't have the right in France to research on that specifically, data from research based on documented cases in France has very well shown that women are a majority of victims of anti-Muslim acts, and women who wear a headscarf are particularly targeted. So the moral panic is not just abstract or even a debate. It hits bodies, it hits careers, it hits safety. So misinformation is not just like um, something we can just argue against or debate. It's also something very effective that goes into our nervous system, basically. So yeah, so we really need to change that.
Thank you, Jamal. I think Delay also had things to add on this war on woke. I'd love to repeat the question for the people in the audience that might have forgotten it. So the question was, which narratives about DEI are most frequently manipulated or deliberately misrepresented to trigger fear, resentment, or moral panic? Dela, would you like to add something to that?
Yeah, there's definitely this war on woke, and Jamal, I think you said it really well that like DEI and like equality and human rights and wanting to protect them has become sort of a thing to be mocked, which is interesting. Um, but so usually this narrative is obviously driven by populist and anti-elitist movements, and Trump is obviously the kind of figure of this all, with his targeting of these critical race theory in education and going after like transgender rights and anti-racist initiatives. But also like in Europe, obviously governments here are very good at kind of utilizing the momentum. And in Europe, definitely, it's all about like painting pictures of like uncontrolled immigration seems to be like this massive thing to be feared, and then all the narratives that go with that. But so mainly the disinformation is always used to create hatred, and to, I think there's also a lot to be gained by the fact that people feel so oversaturated by all this information and having to sift through whether it's fake or not fake. So it leads to like the loss of focus, but ultimately I think it leads to a sense of apathy, which then in terms I think benefits a lot of these movements and actors behind the disinformation. But about woke, I just wanted to say I actually wrote a column, I think it was in 2021, for the Finnish national broadcaster. I didn't say anything controversial. I just asked, like, well, who is awake and who still wants to be asleep? And what does woke actually mean? You know, it's kind of chipping away at the very unequal power structures of many institutions, for example, which have always been designed that way. And the response was absolutely, well, I don't know, shocking, maybe not, but I received like death threats over it. So I think the response was very indicative of when you question the power structures, just how threatening that seems to many. I would also like to add that, you know, obviously, well, as we have already mentioned, vulnerable communities and marginalized people feel the effects of it the most. And obviously, there's huge anti-Arab and Islamophobic sentiment at the moment. And there's like a viral video shared about people celebrating, and it was shared like saying, oh, these Muslims are celebrating a terrorist attack, when in reality it was footage from, I think, from Pakistan celebrating a cricket match win or something along the line. So it's rife, it's everywhere, but I had a thought, circling back. The big problem, I think, in terms of media that you already touched on, I think it was Angeline. Well, actually, both Jamal and Angeline talked about norms and the normativeness of, you know, what is deemed acceptable and who is considered normal or the kind of default. And I think in this, the media plays a huge part, and it is, at least in part, caused by the very homogenic demographic of journalists and the media. And, you know, it will have an impact on the kinds of news stories and what angles get put out, the level of criticality and just basic understanding of race or racism. And Jamal, as you said, it's the same in Finland. Like race, it's like we do not speak of it. It's almost like a swear word. It's not appropriate. And people say, oh, I feel uncomfortable talking about it. So yeah, despite the belief, you know, that journalists like to tell themselves that we're some like objective actors, just floating in space, completely unfazed by any influences or any opinions. You know, we are human beings, obviously, with our own lived experiences, our own viewpoints, our own opinions, and that will, no matter what, have an impact on the kind of stories that we even decide to do. And of course, it impacts on the angle of a story or who we interview, etc. And Jamal, you also mentioned about activism, and like I constantly receive accusations or even concerns from employers saying, "Oh, but you're profiling yourself as a journalist slash activist," and I'm completely baffled by it, and I always ask, like, I don't quite understand what you mean. And by all means, if you know, standing for human rights and believing that every human being should have equal opportunities to live on this planet, then so be it. But yeah, again, I do find it very interesting how it's been framed as a negative.
Thank you, Ndela. I want to say first, I'm so sorry to hear about the death threats. You're bringing a very, very interesting topic. This is something that we don't understand, but when we do fight misinformation or when we try to inform more correctly, we do receive death threats. And whenever you're talking to a broader audience, that's actually a very big risk. Whenever you're challenging a system, whenever you're challenging any kind of oppression, these things tend to happen. It happened to me multiple times. I know that it happened to other people in the panel as well. And I think it's important to remember that there are laws against death threats about harassment, and sometimes, even though it's hard to trust in the legal system, it can be good to actually sue people. That's something that Rokhaya Diallo, a French journalist, has started to do and has started to explain. She's very, very popular, and she speaks on a lot of very big topics: anti-racism, anti-LGBTQI plus phobia, any kind of oppression, at very, very broad scale in France. And she is followed by a lot of people on social media. And she spoke about that, the fact that now she reports them all, every death threat, every kind of harassment, anything she just reports. And I think it's really interesting because if I'm not mistaken, she has a legal background. So I think she might have in the future the idea of maybe changing legislation. But I just find it super relevant in our cases as well, because we might think, oh, but I'm not so followed. Oh, but I'm not so known. Oh, but I'm not so this, that. Maybe nothing's gonna happen, but could potentially change things for the future. So I think it's really, yeah, thank you so much for bringing that topic forward, because this is the reality. If you do try to speak a bit more factually about oppressive system, then you are going to be often either mocked or also very directly threatened. And we think of violence happening online as a bit remote from physical violence, but the border is very thin. So it's really important to remind ourselves that it's very likely, unfortunately, that things happen. So thank you so much for raising that.
Sophia,
Um,
can I just add up very
yeah,
quickly
of course, please go ahead.
a quick point because I'm literally living through that right now, and I feel for you, Ndela. Thank you so much for sharing, and I'm sorry it happened to you. I've been for the past 5 years cyber harassed and dogpiled by the far by any kind of groups, basically, uh, um, targeting me as like a public danger that needs to be silenced. And it became year after year, like some kind of quarterly, um, I would say, yeah, a quarterly wave of threats that I'm receiving, and I'm like literally living it right now because my follower base has doubled in the past 2 months. So I don't even know my follower base anymore, and they just like rush into my DMs, comments, and so on. And I have a ton now, like hundreds and hundreds of rape threats, death threats, and all of these things. People are making videos about me to like find me out and so on. So it's kind of scary. I'm used to it. Tragically, I should never be used to it, but it's very important to raise this point to say like at any moment of your life, if you raise your voice about basic human rights. Just say like it's became an opinion to just say that like black people should live and women are human beings and like very, very, very basic things. And you cater into like the wokeism agenda, you become a target, a very easy target for death threats and all of that. Not even like debating opinions like no, black people shouldn't live. No, you should die too, you know? So there's this sentiment that, and I've been approached recently these last 2 days by anti-racist legal teams that are like anti-carceral because I'm also like not fond of the police and I don't want to go there and we can have also we can find ways to build community to be protected and to protect our physical integrity as well as our mental health from these social media platforms. And I think it's very important, yes, to um, make sure we are safe. Also, psychological safety is also part of DEI, and I feel like we need to be secured in this way to continue the work, and it's a very, very important thing. And I think anti-racist factions um, that are legal, as you said, Sophia, Rogaya is really, really about that. They have advised me to systematically screenshot and kind of like, you know, divert them from doing it over and over again by just basically kind of threatening them back, but with the law, not just with a death threat.
Thank you, Jamal. Holding them accountable. That's what it is about at the end of the day. Thank you very much. And I'm sorry to hear also about the death threats that you're receiving. As I said, the second you're in the public eye and you speak to an audience, unfortunately, it tends to happen. I would like to go on to the next question on Ndela. You started to speak a bit about it on who benefits from the spread of misinformation when it comes to anti-racism and DEI. Who are the people, who are the institution, like who is it that benefits from all of this? Angeline, would you like to go next?
Sure. I think, capitalism benefits, the rich benefit. Uh, um, I think that part of all of this distraction is to keep us like this into this, like this idea that, oh, if you work harder, you're going to be successful, and keeping it busy rather than fighting the actual fact that so much of the extremely wealthy pay very little taxes. And so, so I think that, you don't hear information coming out so much about taxing the rich, you know, but we hear a lot of information about all the misinformation that like my fellow panelists have talked about today. And I think, the rich benefit from these inequities and base their success on these traditional models of success, right? So success being measured in terms of more profit, more more numbers, how many clicks is something going to get, and so that, and I think Nadella, you mentioned that the line between journalism and social media influences is like getting more and more blurry. But if we have unethical journalism that's kind of working for clicks, then, then we also have a lot of kind of on the ground Instagram news people, because that's the way that they're going to get it out there, because it may not be published by some bigger medium, like. And so, sometimes I might go there for my news about what's happening on the ground in Palestine, epic, because it may not be coming out in other places, right? And or going to see what's happening on the ground at a protest here in Berlin that may not be reported fairly about somewhere else. And so, yeah, I myself, like, am blurry on that line of what is then the actual news, and because I don't trust anymore. Um, and I even have, I think, an Instagram folder that's called, ethical media ethics brackets or lack of. And I have another folder called societal collapse. And every day I hope I don't add one more post to that folder, because I'm hopeful that it won't be that way. But sadly, there's so much evidence of it coming across, right? Of this misinformation and disinformation. But the people who are benefiting are the people who own those platforms, and who are working for those clicks, so the rich are benefiting. And you made an excellent point also, Nadella, that, the lack of actual representation of the global majority and the people who have been so historically marginalized in those positions of power, to be able to make those decisions, to say what will then, because whatever we put our money behind is what we value, right? And right now, people are valuing more, getting more clicks so that they can get more money over, um, doing something that's for the greater good, and to looking after each other and having community values. And wouldn't it be great if that was rewarded in a different economic model that is more circular, more caring, essentially.
Yeah, thank you very much, Angeline. Definitely agree with that. It's also very interesting that you're speaking about the rich benefiting from this because there is also those cases of very, very, very wealthy billionaires buying a journalist schools also. And so you see that, I think Bolloré in France, you have the CEO of LVMH as well who's doing that, and I never remember the name of. And it is also showing that there is so much power in information, there's so much power in the media. And if we look at the 13 principles of propaganda, actually taking care of the media first is really, really, really important. So it's really interesting that that you bring it up, and I think it's really straightforward. Like it's an answer
Yeah.
very straightforward. Go ahead, Angeline.
I also want to add, like, just to give an example, Twitter was actually this great platform where a lot of educators connected with each other. So if you couldn't afford to go to a teaching conference, but you were still really interested in improving your pedagogy, you would follow people on Twitter. And it was such a great place for exchange. There were lots of, and then Elon Musk, what Twitter is now X, right? And then all of a sudden, so there was a mass exodus of educators from that platform, and all of a sudden we didn't have this kind of space where we were sharing pedagogy, and we tried all sorts of different aspects, Mastodon, Blue Sky, but it wasn't, but every alternative place didn't have the same big area now. And then so all of a sudden, teachers who were very active as being, anti-racist or anti-discrimination practitioners now didn't have this space where they were congregating because, yeah, someone who saw that the power of that and how it could be wielded to do things like, have someone like, well, different people elected even, and to spread misinformation, and so continue things like curriculum violence that's out there. Because I think when we're not challenging something, we're deemed as, well, sorry, when we do challenge, as my colleagues have said here, we're considered to be activists. But actually every other thing that's out there that is meant to be neutral, that is a political stance. That is, like, teaching is political. What we decide to put in, what we decide to take out, and so like, it's already a decision of upholding a status quo that is political already, right? And so to actually be deemed an activist is like, well, actually, you are very actively upholding the norm here. You are the activist too when you are saying that this, and I'm more like a human rightivist maybe instead.
Thank you so much, Angeline. And Dela, I would love to ask you as well as a journalist from your professional and also maybe personal expertise, who, according to you, benefits from the spread of misinformation when it comes to DI and sorry, and anti-racism?
In addition to political actors and political movements, I would say, uh, following from what Angeline was saying, I think absolutely capitalism, but also I think disinformation is a weapon for destabilization. And, at this point, I don't even know if I'm hopefully being cynical, but I think I'm just being a realist because, war and uncertainty is incredibly lucrative. And, for example, the European Union in March last year unveiled this huge militarization plan. I think they're putting like 800 billion euros into it. And it's all framed under the guise of like defense readiness, obviously fueled by the geopolitical situation, but also this like overwhelming pro-war rhetoric. And I do think disinformation plays into this, and also in terms of shifting public opinion, it creates an incredibly fertile ground for initiatives like these to be able to kind of be just bulldozed through with very little criticality or opposition, really. And obviously, this is a trend Europe-wide where governments all across Europe are ramping up military spending while social educational and welfare programs are just completely being slashed and their budgets are cut drastically. So I think it all serves to create this kind of consent and acceptance for all of this, because fear is an incredibly powerful tool. The apathy that I mentioned earlier, I think, is an incredibly powerful tool. And when people are scared or don't care, they're also willing to accept things they otherwise wouldn't, maybe, and also make certain sacrifices. And just quickly, like the European Union published this white paper for European defense readiness. And in it, it was really interesting the way they had framed it. They talked about like this kind of harm without specifying exactly what harm, but it said things like, the only way we can ensure peace is to have the readiness to deter those who would do us harm. Then they went on to mention proximity to North Africa and the Middle East, which makes Europe a receptacle for the spillover of the wars, migration, and effects of climate change. So it was a very peculiar framing of it. And in it, it was as if the European Union, had no bearing as an active actor in, any of this. And instead like framed itself as very much a passive actor that had to respond to all of this. Yes, I could go on about this, but again, I'll just leave it at that for now.
Thank you, Nela. Know that you can always go on. We have time and we are really happy to listen to everything you have to say. But for now, Jamal, maybe would you like to add something on who is benefiting from all of this disinformation and misinformation?
Sure. Yeah, as Angelina and Della brilliantly said, I think our difference are not just like they're part of a profit mechanism, basically. There's underpaid labor, there's segmented markets, there's unequal access to leadership. So it's very much of a systemic framework. These are not accidents. They are patterns that concentrate wealth. And in France, the DEI backlash is also a battle over what and also like who gets to define the universal. So when a historically dominant norm presents itself as neutral, as universal, any request for recognition looks like an attack to the system. So misinformation protects not only material privilege, but also symbolic privilege for me, who gets to be the default human. And it goes back again to the media ecosystem. When media power becomes concentrated, when agendas, cultural wars become a business model, the effects of media concentration and pressures on, for example, pluralism in France are substantial, including within what you named, Safir, earlier, within the Bolloré media sphere and all the far-right multi-billionaires who are buying entire media empires. They're buying poll and survey production houses. They're buying journalist schools to broadcast their propaganda. And we today in France, we even speak of a Bollarization of the society, coined after this very harmful person who is Vincent Bolloré. And even for me as a writer, I don't really have many choices there if I want to publish my anti-system books outside of his realm. So the heavily used propaganda and even like this anti-white racism rhetoric, the Blue Lives Matter movement to protect our policemen, the direct and unshakable support of criminals, even sex offenders, like literally a recently condemned pedocriminal journalist is still presenting his show on the #1 news channel in France today. And like basically well-known racists are all part of this meta language that we learn to accept day after day, which is very efficiently widening the overturn window. I'm not saying media equals propaganda. I'm just saying when the outrage becomes profitable for these kind of media elites, misinformation becomes indeed a capitalistic product. Misinformation is the privilege of those who can't afford this confusion, because confusion freezes change for us. It leaves the status quo very healthy. So this system, obviously, for me, benefits all the ones who fear accountability, because DI as its core is accountability. It's measuring disparities, it's changing processes, it's naming biases. So accountability is uncomfortable for systems built on unequal comfort.
Absolutely. Thank you so much to the three of you for answering this question. Angeline, I'd like to ask you, from a person who is working with the youth as an educator, what role do social media platforms play in accelerating or normalizing this misinformation about DEI and anti-racism? And where do you see most of the damage happening?
Mm. I think one of the things about that has been researched in schools, for example, is that actually the peer-to-peer abuse is actually quite prominent too. And so when you're able to get your hands on these platforms, when you are at an age where you are still formulating your own sense of right, wrong. Your hormones are wild, and your brain is not fully formed. Also, you're going to be testing things, trialing things. You're going to be making mistakes, and then you have this powerful tool like Grok, where you can then superimpose an image of someone that's very close to you into to make some fake porn, um, and spread it across the school. And so who's then responsible for that, right? And I mean, and when you think about like, accountability, you know, and so I think there are so many different parties that are part of this picture, right? Some people might go, okay, it's the child themselves. Some people will be like, it's the parents. Some people will be the school. And okay, but like when you invent something that has the capability to do this and you put it out there, and someone can have such easy access to it because it's kind of free, but it's not free. It because you pay in so many other ways, right? As well. But and so I think, like, when we're thinking about the role of these platforms, they accelerate and normalize this behavior that can happen. They give people a means in which to do harm in ways that was really it makes it even increasingly more difficult to hold people to account. And so, but I think that so we need a more regulated industry where and I think that things like, the Digital Services Act of the EU, is trying to do that and have people, be more compliant. But how it's like, I imagine that it's with the ever emerging technologies that are coming out at such a rapid rate, like how do you keep up with that, right? We can, like, I think I'm up to date with what the teens are doing these days, and then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I hear about this new thing, and it's a little bit like, 6, 7, like it, I don't know what it means, but it's out there, and it's causing harm, and it's perpetuating lots of different aspects, and so I think that we don't take enough diligence to safeguard the vulnerable at a very systemic level. And also I think that some of these platforms are being used in such irresponsible ways that it's also suppressing the voices that would want to use these platforms for good also, right? And so but if we talked a lot about the rich and shareholders and things when they are not held to moral account and can be morally reprehensible, then they're going to suppress things that don't feed what's going to make them successful as well. And so I think that yeah, we need to do more. At the same time, I don't know what's the solution. So Australia has this social media ban now. You know, you have to be 16 in order to be able to access things like TikTok. And right now, my niece is visiting because she's just done an exchange in France and spent 2 months there learning the language in a school. And she's just told me that, you know, her younger brother, who is 14, so my nephew, circumvented the the age limit because it's on facial recognition and he's got a little bum fluff growing and he's like and he was able to circumvent and be approved and but also making something a ban is going to only make it more attractive to kids. They're going to and they're going to find ways and other things to use them. So I think that you know, social media platforms have a lot to answer for when they don't regulate themselves and hold themselves to account and take more responsibility and then and when they do not comply and only comply to things because regionally some place is saying you need to, rather than saying this is the gold standard of compliance and actually whichever country I then put it out with, I need myself to account these standards rather than saying, well, I have to do it here in the EU, but I don't need to do it somewhere else. And I think that that's something that, yeah, they have a lot to answer for in what they put out there.
Both terrifying and also so interesting what you're speaking about, Angeline. I think it's very interesting to also think about the dimension around accountability, responsibility, and the lack of actually from all of those giant platforms and what it can do to the most vulnerable. I love the fact that you used that term as well because we tend to forget that children are indeed the most marginalized group in the world, and it's also our responsibility as educators, as DEI practitioners, as human rights activists to always take them into account in our practices. So thank you very much for that. Jamal, for you as a person who is really active on social media and who just recently got over 100,000 followers on Instagram, congratulations. Would you like to also answer the question, please?
Sure. Yeah, I would say first that social media very much shape the dynamics of attention today, and therefore they shape what society believes, what's normal and what's not. The problem is that algorithmic amplification rewards heat, not truth. And so social media platforms are built to, yes, maximize engagement, and nothing engages like outrage on identity. So as you said, I'm now followed by 160K people across my social media platforms, and I have just told you about how threatened I am by people. But it's also the very structure of the social media platform that acts insidiously. In 2025 alone, my Instagram account froze a dozen of times, and Meta has arbitrarily deleted about 20K people from my following base in total. Obviously, when I contacted Meta to complain, they said they're just cleaning my account from bots who send me DMs afterwards crying for help because their only hope was me resuming my free of charge all the time available social media work. And also like obviously a few weeks after October 7 happened, 10 out of 11 companies I had signed a contract with dropped me because of quote unquote what's happening in the world right now. So even if the conference mostly was about how to be a better ally as a cis man for cis women. I'm saying cis women because every time I pushed intersectionality in France as a lens of analysis, they said, no thanks, we can't talk about trans women anymore because we're fed up seeing them on TV all day long. Or like, no, please don't talk about Black and brown and Asian women because we just want to focus on women. They meant white women. So my shadow ban for my social media networks and my podcast also has always been there for the past 6 years now. Not just because of the active posting on Palestine, Sudan, the Congo, Yemen, or the Uyghurs. It's because my podcast is very much deemed even by journalists. Like I have actual articles by journalists saying that my conception of love through Arab and or Muslim wisdom is a very dangerous content, as in Islam equals terrorism and sexuality and gender equals pornography. So, and another point for me is that platforms also very much compress everything into short formats. So, for example, on TikTok, it shouldn't be um, much more than 60, 70 seconds. So the result of that is that nuance is punished, simplification is rewarded. And when nuance is punished long enough, people start to believe that complexity itself is suspicious. And as a consequence, there is a normalization of what we are doing in anti-racist collectives, or like even in DEI, it's a threat that anti-racism is extremism. And the harm is not only ideological, because organizations are also downstream from public discourse. It's actual human beings that live there and who face our content on social media. So when people spend hours doom scrolling in polarized feeds, they bring that poster into meetings at work with suspicion, with irony, with hostile jokes, with I'm just asking questions, you know? So the workplace becomes the theater of the culture war where deliberate racism and misogyny and homophobia can't be said in broad daylight anymore as people used to. The favorite line from the establishment here in France, at least, is "On peut plus rien dire," meaning we can't say anything anymore. So even if social media platforms didn't probably invent hate, they rather industrialized its distribution very, very efficiently. So again, in this uh, shit show, can I say shit show? In this horror show that the word is right now, neutrality, as Angeline said earlier on, neutrality is not peace, it's abdication, it's a form of a political stance. And in crisis periods, for me, a company, an organization, NGO can either amplify fractures through silence and neutrality, or they can become uh, a counter laboratory of cohesion through active inclusion, not just diversity because we have a token or whatever. So, um, and makes me think of again, Audre Lorde, her again, saying that that sentence that should be actually engraved in every leadership handbook in companies. She said, "Your silence will not protect you." And I think basically it says everything. It's we should gather and harness the courage to speak up, because neutrality and silence and being peaceful and being like very um like politically correct don't bring about it doesn't properly bring about social justice.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And the definition of politically correct also is evolving, right? What was
Yeah.
politically correct 20 years ago was to not say racist things,
Hmm.
not do racist things. And maybe today what's politically correct is actually to be a bit more leaning towards that racism, challenge these immigration policies and so on and so forth. So it's important to also know that all of those terms, they are evolving with the perceptions that we have of them. We spoke about wokeness a bit earlier as well, and this newer definition of wokeism and how being woke is really just about being aware, being awake to
Mm.
what's going on in the world. And the definitions have shifted and shifted and shifted as most people have started to use that term because it became part of the mainstream as well. So I think it's really interesting to, in specifically with disinformation and misinformation, to look at the vocabulary and how something what something meant 10 years ago is maybe not what it means today.
Yeah, because political awareness is basically something, as you just said, like 20 years ago it was to prevent people from being racist and from being sexist and et cetera, et cetera. But today it is literally the new agenda from Trump to what's happening in France, but obviously in any part of the world to make sure it's catering to the far right movements, as in we are living in democracies, and so we should have free speech. And because we have free speech and we have a full liberty to say out loud what we think, then we can say anything we want.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Rama. We have had the chance to talk about the how, about the what, about the why, and now we are going to try to answer that question. So, what are the most effective ways to challenge DI misinformation in public and online spaces without actually amplifying it further? Ndela, you are the journalist person here, and we would love to hear from you. What are the ways? Please tell us, inform us.
Uh, oh, this is really hard because I think it's really difficult to address it simply because of the magnitude of it. But I think first and foremost, like the thing that we can control is ourselves. So, when navigating any sort of space, whether that's online or in the real world, I would say question everything, keep your critical brain on. Um, you know, I think people think, oh, I'll just go on Instagram and I'll scroll on this and oh, haha, there's a cute little video of a cat or a funny meme. But, not everything is always as it seems. And it sounds like I've got my like tinfoil hat on. But, um, I would always say, who has posted or written whatever you're reading, what have they posted previously, who's behind the account, why might they be posting it? I don't know. I don't. It's really frustrating, and obviously, it's not even so obvious, especially with the advances in AI being able to generate incredibly realistic video. So I feel like I don't have any good solutions because I'm personally finding it increasingly grating where I go on social media because I want to switch off, but I'm having to use the same brain that I use in my day-to-day life and at work. And it's grating to the point where I'm like, what? I'm not getting out of it what I thought I was. So should I even be on there? So yeah, I'm sorry to be like, I don't have any solutions, but yeah, aside from just beware, stay woke, stay alert, stay active. And yeah, just always wonder who's behind it all.
Thank you so
Oh,
much.
oh, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I did want to say, oh, sorry. Yes, I did have, there are obviously a number of fact-checking organizations. Usually, even when you're consuming news, it's, what are they basing the information on? Who have they quoted in the piece? All these kind of very, well, I don't know if they're basic questions, but um, yeah. And I saw there was Mahmoud, I think, in the chat shared. There's a platform called Ground News, which kind of pulls news stories from around the world, which is good to not just be aware of what's being posted in the news around the world, but it also has this bias kind of meter. But yeah, there are a number of checking organizations. If you read a news story, for example, and want to just take a shortcut in finding whether it's real or not. But yeah, apart from that, I'm out of like actual concrete steps, unfortunately. But yeah.
Thank you so much. To be honest, you already shared quite a lot, even though you tend to think that that's not the case. I think it was very helpful. Angeline and Jamal, I'm going to challenge you just because of the interest of time. What would be one thing from you, really one sentence on what is one effective way to challenge DI and misinformation? Angeline, would you like to go first?
Sure. I think one strategy I'm using right now is with my 11-year-old is to learn more about the brain and psychology. It sounds a bit disconnected, but I think it's not because I think I gave him a book called Dose by TJ Power. And I told him that please read this book and then please teach us as a family about how dopamine works, oxytocin, serotonin, endorphins. And so as soon as he finished with the part about dopamine, and he's like, yeah, when you go on social media, mom, and you get those little things, every time you clicked on that, you were getting a dopamine hit. And actually, there are other ways we can do this. And and it was great because like now I'm empowering him with some knowledge that I hope is going to help the whole family to be better, to prioritize people over devices. And to bring it back to what Katalin said at the very beginning, to go out into your community and to engage so that we are hearing more stories, learning more about others, so that we have not just the digital skills that Nazila talked about, but we are also active citizens building community skills that's going to help negate all of this disinformation and misinformation.
Wow. Clever parenting, clever child. This is really amazing. Thank you so much. And this, for those who don't know in the audience, I also am very passionate about neuroscience, and this DOSE framework comes from positive psychology, and it's very much about understanding that happiness is not just about the thoughts that we have, but it's also very physical. What do we do to our bodies so that we trigger that happiness and it remains at a steady level? So thank you so much, Angeline, for that. Jamal, in one sentence, what is one effective way for you to challenge DI misinformation in public and online spaces without amplifying it further?
Yeah, I will be quick on that. I would say with a very we live in a capitalist world, so I would say also like this collective capacity building should also be linked to stable funding because misinformation is not just content, it's organized production and it has networks and proper funding and TV channels broadcast to millions of people. So unlike us, or at least unlike me, who literally worked 9 different jobs that aren't paid to continue educating on these issues, we need funding. We need quick response coalitions of journalists, legal experts, civil society, DEI practitioners, and but this needs also to be funded because it's very, very valuable work. And this is why also I think it's nice to end up on that why ENAR Foundation is very cool.
Thank you. Appreciating it. Thank you to the three of you so much. I would like to ask the audience, do we have any questions for our three panelists? Meanwhile, I will be reading one message that we have in the chat because I think it's very important to speak about what is happening in Iran right now. And we have a person who is Iranian who shared. And the message is coming as follows. Misinformation helps authoritarian regime remain in power, whether in the case of Netanyahu or Khamenei, both in Israel and in Islamic Republic of Iran. As an Iranian who has been unable to speak with her family for over 2 weeks due to a complete internet shutdown, and considering the reported massacre of 20,000 people and more in Iran, the silence of the media is deeply concerning. Oppression and the killing of ordinary civilians must be condemned as these are fundamental human rights issues. All of this needs to be viewed through a human right lens, but unfortunately, the media sometimes pushes their own agenda. Thank you so much for being so candid and vulnerable in the chat. I really appreciate it. And I really have to say, I send all of my love and support to the people of Iran, to you, to all of the other people who are from Iran in the audience. I know there are also other people. I cannot imagine what you're going through right now. And I just wanted to really send my deepest support. Thank you so much for sharing that. Do we have any other questions or comments about this panel for our panelists? We have 5 minutes, so please go ahead. If I see that there is no questions, I have one last question that I could be asking the panelists. So please feel free to ask either in the chat, or you're also free to unmute yourselves. Or maybe just some remarks, not necessarily questions. I think we've covered so much already, so I also understand that it's hard to add on to such brilliant minds. Well, if we don't have any questions, I would say let's take the opportunity to answer our final questions, which was very similar to the previous one, but a bit more societal. So looking across societies and organizations, what is one strategy you believe is underused in fighting misinformation about anti-racism and DEI? Jamal, would you like to go first, please?
Yeah, sure. I think again we need quick response coalitions of people, but also places where people um, practice disagreement without humiliation. I think one of the things that we can see in organized groups of activists, of DI practitioners, is that we might not agree on everything. And I think, as Angeline said, also like libraries, community centers, school programs, workplace forums, workplace conferences is also designed potentially to facilitate on these things. And this could be also brought upon online uh, because we can actually not just like call out people, but like call in people and think of ways of how we can disagree on different types of topics without being harmful in the discussion. So even the way we communicate with each other, I think in a society on a societal level, I think it's important to not just be in a very I would say with the funding, with the coordination, with third spaces, we don't just build the infrastructure of truth, we leave truth to fend for itself in a marketplace designed to reward spectacle and fake news. So basically, let's not be, as Andela said earlier, let's not be completely um, 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 diving into the vortex of what social media is with TikTok and Instagram, and let's also like talk in real life and fast check
Yeah,
the information.
absolutely. Thank you, Jamal. Ndela, would you like to go next?
Would follow that and say, as an anti-capitalist, I think we need to figure out a way to not rely on the capitalist system, but also on social media in terms of activism or organizing. You know, we cannot rely on these platforms that are actively causing harm to, you know, in the hopes that we can do good through them. And as we've seen at the moment in Iran, as well as numerous other countries, you know, we are at the mercy of our states. They can pull the plug at any moment and, you know, have an internet blackout. It's a very real threat. So I think we need to increasingly, you know, learn basic skills, whether that means, you know, how to organize in real life, But as well, I think we need to learn community building skills. And I think so much of the capitalist system is based on convenience and quickness. And we need to learn to kind of be okay with the discomfort. And, you know, being part of a community is sometimes it's incredibly inconvenient. You might not have time to, I don't know, help your neighbor. But if you're real and true about what you intend it to be, then I think we have to also learn to reshape our thinking of what it means. But yeah, I think we should just learn basic kind of conflict resolution skills and how to tolerate discomfort. And yeah, and we need to learn to organize. A brilliant book is by Mariam Kaba, a brilliant abolitionist activist and community organizer in the States. And she wrote a book that I often return to called Let This Radicalize You. So I strongly recommend that.
Amazing, Dela, thank you. Angeline, would you like to tell us your opinion? What are your last words for the session?
It's great that Adele ended with a book recommendation, because I think for me a big recommendation is to say that, you know, we need to read more. It sounds like just pretty basic, but I think that, you know, our access to different stories um, can be in the written word that will expose us to multiple ways of seeing, knowing, doing, and being that we don't may not encounter every time at a deep interconnected level that's going to move us to do something, right? So we can have easy access to data and data points, but data's not going to move people. And Anaïs Nin said that you know, we don't see the way they are, we see them the way we are. And we are constantly evolving our own identity, right? And in terms of like our experiences is going to shape us. I'm a different person today than I was 2 years ago. Um, but you know, when I want to learn about others, I think, you know, like libraries or what libraries could be, because like libraries can also be very bad. But but if we have really, really great places that are multi-literacy, multilingual, you know, multimodal in the way it's shaping and helping people access information in responsible and ethical ways, to help expand the stories that we can be exposed to with the full knowledge also that the written word isn't everything, that they are, because like great libraries are also cultivating things like having live people come and share their story and to build that skill of empathy with each other. And so I think that yeah, I think invest in those types of community spaces and services that will help build those connections.
Absolutely. Thank you to the three of you so much for the discussion. I am so grateful. As the three of you know, I admire your work so much. So for me, it was really a pleasure to talk to you, to have those answers, to have these insights, and I'm so, so grateful. For everyone in the audience, please do not forget to go check their profiles, whether on LinkedIn, Instagram, check their websites. Angeline, Jamal, and Della have done incredible work, and I think this is what we need. We need information that comes from expertise. We need information that comes from knowledge, and those three people can really do that for us. So thank you to the three of you so much for having answered the invitation. And we will be moving on to the break. After that, we'll be having our keynote on countering DI fatigue and resistance with Dr. Raki Kasi. Please come back at 10:40 for the next session. Thank you all so much. Water, some tea, some coffee, anything that you like. Raki, it's such a pleasure to have you here today. I hope you enjoyed the first conversation. I know that you were listening to the panel, and I would love to let you introduce yourself, sorry.
Thank you. Thank you, Safia. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. The first panel was very interesting, I think I will reach to one of everyone to continue the conversation. Can I share my screen? Yes.
Absolutely. Please go ahead.
Oh, it's activated.
Yeah, I will allow that right now. It's just allowed, so you should be able to do that.
Okay, do you see the
Yeah.
presentation? Maybe what,
Wonderful.
this way?
Yeah. Thank you so much,
Okay.
Rach. I will then mute myself and just listen to your brilliance as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, thank you for being here today. I'll talk to you about countering DEI fatigue and resistance, a mental health perspective. Well, I'm going to, does it work? Yes. Say a little bit more about myself. I'm a social psychologist. I started with research. I also do teaching at Sorbonne University. I teach the links how racism and health are linked to medical students. I also do therapy and training and consulting. I'm also engaged or committed to certain organizations like Fondation de France for those who need funds, to Saint-Denis Département, and to Sanofi. I'm part of the AMC project. A Million Conversation project is about inequality in health, and I'm a part of the advisory board. So today we'll talk about the impacts of racism on health, how to switch from surviving mode to living mode, and some recommendations for individuals and to organizations. Racism is a health issue. I'm not going to explain what racism is because I think you all know what racism is, but I will use a case or a story to show how racism impact health. And I use Isa's story. Isa is one of my patients. I changed the name, but I meet Isa every week uh, in my office, and I'll use her story to explain what I want to share with you today. So some time ago, I received in my clinical practice a young woman I would call Isa. When she was hired as a legal advisor in a large international law firm, she was enthusiastic, a graduate of a prestigious university, passionate about her work. She fully committed herself. At first, everything went well, but quite quickly, a sense of discomfort settled in. A colleague asked her, where are you from? She said, I'm from Paris. And he said, yes, but where are you really from? Another colleague, looking at her natural hair, said, how do you manage that every morning? At the team lunch, someone joked, Isa, since you're from Africa, you must know how to dance, right? Isa smiled. She said nothing, but sorry, they were just comments, weren't they? But they accumulated. Her manager was more demanding with her than with others. She criticized the way Isa wrote emails, the way she spoke in meetings, sorry. Isa felt humiliated. Each remark was a small cut, almost insignificant when taken alone, but repeated day after day, they became a burden, a silent pain that slowly eroded her confidence and her sense of safety at work. Then one day, she was denied a strategic project without explanation. Later, she learned it had been given to a less experienced colleague, but one perceived as more dynamic and leadership ready. Isa began to doubt herself. Maybe she wasn't good enough. So she worked harder. She took fewer breaks. She stayed late. She covered for absent colleagues. But opportunities kept slipping away. Recognition never came. During her performance review, she read, lacks impact when speaking, needs to develop leadership presence. yet her work was impeccable. She could see she was not treated like others, and a doubt began to take hold. What if this wasn't just about competence? Racism is not only insults, explicit or acts of discrimination. It is a system that ranks people often unconsciously according to perceived origin or skin color. A system where the higher you go, the less diversity you see, not because diversity was never present, but because it was filtered out along the way. So Aisa did what many people do. She withdrew. She stopped joining lunches. She spoke less in meetings. Very quickly, she was described as cold, distant. People started saying that she didn't really fit in, and the machine began to run on its own. One morning, Isa could no longer get out of her car, parked outside her office, her hands gripping the steering wheel, tears running down her cheeks. Her body said stop. Diagnosed with burnout, her doctor put her on medical leave, then extended it. She never returned to that company. She never accused anyone of racism. She simply disappeared. That's a powerful example, but I can assure you I see these kind of examples every day in my office. And explain a little bit more how racism impacts health, and it impacts health at multiple levels. It impacts health directly. We saw it with the example. When we experience situations of racism and discrimination, microaggressions, and so on, our mental and physical health are impacted, like lack of self-confidence, anxiety, stereotype threat effects. It's the fear someone can feel when they can have the fear of confirming the negative stereotypes about their group, and it impacts their performance. Racism is a chronic stressor, and eventually it impacts our body by creating inflammations. And I see more and more people having mental health issues and health issues due to racism. We also talk about racial trauma and intergenerational trauma and so on. So that are direct effects of racism on mental and physical health. We also talk about inequalities in access to healthcare, like people from disadvantaged group are access to care that is not at the same level of everyone else. For example, in France, we have the first French study made by Professor Xavier Bobia at Montpellier University. Because I said the first, because in France, we like to say that everything regarding racism is in the US or elsewhere in Europe, but not in France. So we had to show evidence that in France also we have inequalities in access to care depending on the origins. And in their study, they showed that for the same clinical case, a white man will be ranked in absolute emergency by 63% of medical professionals, when only 43 percent of them will do so for a Black woman with the same symptoms, meaning that they undermine the symptoms of the Black woman, and then that creates inequalities in access to care. We also talk about Mediterranean syndrome. It's like a kind of pain minimization associated with people coming from the Mediterranean, Arabs or Blacks people. And it has health consequences, because if you undermine the pain, you will not give the good medication, and it has consequences on the health. Biases are also, when we talk about racism in medicine and health, we also talk about biases embedded in medical knowledge, like the dermatology, for example, or any other specialty. In medical studies, the books use white skin color more often than the other skin colors, so it can lead to diagnosis errors. Another way racism can impact health is vicarious racism. It's defined as exposure to racism experienced by others, not others like us, others that look like us. Okay. So the vicarious racism, it works like when you see someone being hurt because of what he or she or they are, and if they are like there's the identification is strong, and you can say it could be me. So you can be harmed by watching these kind of images, and feel fear of that racism. So we talked about information before. We are all exposed to many kind of images every day, and this can harm our mental health. So being informed is not the same as being constantly exposed. So social media, as you know, amplifies what we see. Maybe the solution would be to reset algorithm, diversify our interests, schedule disconnections, because it really impacts our mental health. Also, it's important to say that when we work on DEI, on racism, it's difficult for us to disengage because we fear to be a bad ambassador of our own group, to be a bad fighter. We still continue, but it can harm our health. So why backlash happens? Backlash happens because things are just moving. It's a natural effect. It's a reaction to change. Because if there's no backlash, it will mean that nothing is moving. It's because of our work and the work of other people in DI, in anti-racism, that we see the backlash happening right now. Some people, those who have power, fear of losing their status and privileges, so they react, and unfortunately, it causes our fatigue. It causes it costs our health, and we have to find a way to survive it, to survive and to live. So how can we go from surviving to living? Well, as I said, fatigue is normal. We feel it. Every one of us ever felt it. We still feel it, but we absolutely have to find a way to go through and to take care of ourselves. Rest is not disengagement. We have to take rest. It is I think mandatory. We can also celebrate ourselves, celebrate the little victories we have in our days. It's a part of the resistance because we cannot stay in the surviving mode. In French, we say qui veut voyager loin ménage sa monture, meaning if you want to go far, you have to take care of yourself. Or in Italian, say chi va piano va sano. We have to take care of ourselves. So how can we do that? Well, there's multiple ways of healing. As one of you said, I think it's Angeline. We are all different. Kids are all different, but adults are also all different. So you can explore and find what can you do to get some relief, get some peace. I'm just giving you some examples, but you will find your the best way to do it, like writing or talking to people that understands you, of course. Body-based practices like walking, swimming, sports. I also like to, sorry, I wrote down my notes and on the class. I would like to mention a Palestinian healer. Yes, her name is Ashira Darwish, and she talked about therapy by body, because sometimes language doesn't work when you have suffered. So using the body is very, very, very important. So working, swimming, or massage, or whatever makes you feel good, it works. It works. Animals, pets, nature, going in the forest, working, connecting to nature is proven that it's lessen the stress you feel. Arts also works, like painting, music, crafts, and so on. Cultural and collective forms of care like Tai Chi, yoga, meditation, prayers, spirituality, whatever your spirituality is, in connection with people who make you feel safe, like friends, relatives, support groups. Non-mixed spaces sometimes are important. And choose your therapist. This point is very important for me. Well, I'm a social psychologist. I also do therapy. It's not natural for social psychologists to do therapy, but I chose to do it and I did it, and it's going great. Well, the difference I have with my clinical peers is that I take into account the group, our group belongings. I take into account our beliefs and situations. So all these three aspects are important for me, and I know my limits. And when people came the first time, they say, "I choose you because you're a Black woman." At first, I did not understand what they mean, because for me, I'm a therapist for everyone, so everyone are welcomed. But through the time, my position changed, or maybe I now understand more what it means, because at first it was like, I'm surprised. Why do you say that? Then, and my position was, everyone can be a therapist if you are competent, whatever. Then now, 50 more years later, I understand what they mean, because I'm a Black woman, my parents come from Senegal, and I have 40 more years, and I understand things. I was exposed to some situations that my white colleague never was exposed to. So I have a knowledge she doesn't have. So I understand why the patients say that. So now I accept it. So choose your therapist is important. You can be free to change your therapist if it doesn't fits you. But as I said, there's many ways to do therapy, many ways to healing, and you just find what works with you. Back as a story, I'm going to pursue a little bit what she said, what she has done. Well, and I'm going to read. Leaving the company was not leaving the company does not bring relief. For a long time, Aisa feels worse. Her body remains tense. She wakes up alert. Every email feels like a threat. Every silence feels loaded. She has left the workplace, but her nervous system has not left the experience. She becomes cautious. She scans rooms. She measures her words. She avoids conflict. She doubts new environments before they even disappoint her. This is not weakness. This is what happens after prolonged exposure to threat. At first, Isa does not feel anger. She feels confusion, then shame, then guilt. It takes time before she can say, something was done to me. acceptance is not immediate. Neither is anger. Both come slowly in waves. What helps is not rushing recovery. What helps is finding someone who understands that racism is not an opinion, but an experience that leaves traces in the body. With the right therapist, Isa stops asking herself what she did wrong. She starts naming what happened. She also changes her environment, not all at once, gradually. She chooses spaces where she does not have to be on guard. She rebuilds routines that make her feel grounded: movement, silence, creation, connection. Little by little, her body learns something new, that not every space is dangerous. The fear does not disappear overnight, but it loosens. And one day, Aisa notices something subtle. She laughs without scanning the room. She rests without guilt. She speaks without rehearsing. She is the same person and she's different in the same time. She knows what she needs and decides to go through more peace. Um, Sorry, I just will add something in this story. When people come to me the first time, when they say they come most of the time because of racism and discrimination in work at work, and the there's different steps to healing, and the first steps is to just listen, to take the emotions, and to put some words on what they lived, what they experienced, because most of the patients feel like it's their fault, that they have done something wrong, and it is not the case, because racism comes from someone else. So I have to, well, replace things to make them understand that they are victims and not the causes of what they felt. So first we do that, then little by little we make like zoom. We take the big picture, well, because many people like their job, they define themselves by what they do, by they identify with their job, with their employment, and I have to replace things, and sometimes we do history in their families, where do they come from, their cultural values, and so on, and then create some perspective, because when you are in depression, well, the perspective disappears. So I help them, well, having back this perspective. I am this person. I experienced this event, but I'm not this event. I'm not a victim. I will go through it, and I will heal and do other things, and maybe join another organization. Maybe do what I always wanted to do, and I am valuable. I am important, and so on. So it's a work on the identity, on the event, and to replace the event in their path. So that's what I do with them. But organization, so I don't know if some of you here works in organizations. So sometimes I do workshops or trainings, and try to, yes, work with organizations, because many people are employees, and they have a social responsibility. So psychological safety for me is not optional, it's absolutely important. In France, the organizations have the obligation to keep mental and physical safety to their employees. So they have to do it. But concerning the DEI topics, what I see, unfortunately, is that racism isn't included in DEI topics, or not enough. People have fear. I think it's Jamal who was I was talking about that. They have the fear of using the word racism. They have the fear to name things. So it's really difficult to work on this topic specifically, but it harms people, and I try to show them how it harms people. Well, in the case of Aisha, she just um, quit and go as well. So they can even not notice it. So I have to bring that to them. And they have this responsibility. So they have to take their responsibility. They have to give structured support, not just symbolic gestures, because I see that too much every year at 21st March. Every organization do their communication. They do maybe um, a talk or whatever, and it stops there. Nothing changed really in the organization, but we need that from them, like creating safe spaces, listening units. I have done that with some organizations, listening units for racialized people. They have to take a long-term commitment, not a crisis response. I say that too much, too often. They have to train the professionals, create signals of clear signals of leadership, and create spaces to understand what happened and make sure that doesn't happen again. But we are far from that today. I'd like to, well, not all organizations are some of them take responsibility, and I'd like to talk to you about the American Psychological Association, because for me, their 2021 apology was really, really important. Well, in Europe, I did not really heard about that, but as Europe look at the American Psychological Association, I hope that it will come here. But I'd like to read and to present you just some sentences of their apology, because it's a big document. You can find it in the internet. And just some extract. See, well, the American Psychological Association failed in leading the discipline of psychology, was complicit in contributing to systemic inequities, and hurt many through racism, racial discrimination, and denigration of people of color, thereby falling short on its mission to benefit society and improve lives. APA is profoundly sorry, accept responsibility for, and owns the action and inactions of APA itself, the discipline of psychology, and individual psychologists who stood as leaders for their organization and field. Whereas psychology cannot harness its potential to disarm and dismantle racism without addressing its own history of racism and support for human hierarchy, since its origins as a scientific discipline in the mid-19th century, psychology has, through acts of commission and omission, contributed to the dispossession, displacement, and exploitation of communities of color. This early history of psychology, rooted in oppressive psychological science to protect whiteness, white people, and white epistemologies, reflected the social and political landscape of the US at that time. Psychology developed under these conditions, helped to create, express, and sustain them, continues to bear their indelible imprint, and often continues to publish research that confirms with white racial hierarchy. And the last one. Therefore, be it resolved that APA reaffirms that race is a social construct with no underlying genetic or biological basis, and debunks the notion that different groups can be ranked hierarchically, oh sorry, hierarchically on the basis of physical characteristics. Therefore, be it resolved that future APA actions could be include targeted interventions to benefit other groups that have experienced systems of oppression, including those based on religion, sex, class, sexual orientation, and gender diversity and disability identity. So that's just some sentences of the apology, but it's very long and it covers almost every topics regarding racism and the responsibility of APA in racism. So to finish, how can we commit to these topics sustainably? For organizations, as I said, provide real resources, protect long-term engagement, really take this engagement and respect it. For you as individuals, choose one action that helps you live and not just survive. And to finish, I'd like to cite Amandine Gay, who is an author, an actress, and a French producer. She said, "The ultimate act of resistance would be to become an old Black woman." Thank you.
Thank you so much, Raki. I don't know if you saw, but I was giving you an upload as well as an image. Thank you so much. It was so informative, and I am really grateful that you also end on a positive note that we are looking at also how to make psychology anti-racist, how to make psychology safer for all people. So congratulations on a very interesting talk. I'm really, really grateful that you accepted this invitation. I would like to ask in the audience, do we have any questions, maybe any comments that we would like to ask? Don't hesitate to raise your hand. We have about 5 minutes to answer. I also put it in the chat earlier, but I don't believe anybody's asked anything in there. I know it's very early in the morning, but please, I know you have thousands of questions. Angeline, please.
Oh, I have a question, but it's probably going to take me too long to type in the chat. So I'm just going to ask it. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing all of this. I think one thing we're trying to do in schools is to address what we're terming as or a term that's become quite popular is identity-based harm. So we have child protection and safeguarding, and so a lot of our child protection and safeguarding work has historically been more about sexual misconduct and you know like a typical kind of bullying and identifying forms of harm without addressing that intersectional piece and addressing and thinking about you know identity based incidences, etc. Has this term also kind of been used in different space, like the spaces that you're in? What does that look like for you?
You mean the intersectional term?
I mean, like, in like, so for example, like, you mentioned that organizations may not have recognized these intersections, and so I'm just wondering how they're enhancing and strengthening their work to address this. And one of the ways in which we're doing it is deliberately by trying to infuse the term identity-based harm, and in order to mitigate this. And so I was just wondering if there was something similar in your spaces or how is it being done?
Yes, sometimes they do that. We talk about how do they say it? Social how do you say it? Social discrimination. They use the term social instead of origins, instead of religion, and so on. So they don't address the problem directly. So sometimes they ask me to come and to talk about social discrimination, and meaning that the difference between how you say les hautes catégories socio-professionnelles et les
High skill professionals?
yes, and low kids professionals. So sometimes they ask me to do that, but I don't really agree. So sometimes I say okay, I come and I talk, I address the topics, because for me it's hypocrite to not using the right terms, the right words. As you said, I think Jamal earlier, they think like if you erase the term race, you will erase racism. That is not true. We all know that. So I just keep going on what I do, and even if they trying to undermine the topic. So I hope that may be clear.
Thank you so much, Rakim. Jamal, you had a question as well.
Yeah, very quickly, I was wondering if you could talk to us about how us as DEI practitioners and activists and um, people who are in this field of anti-racism can actually be psychologically protected from whatever happens on our daily lives, which is probably that we are mostly all like racialized people here, and I feel like maybe there is some kind of protection we could have. Also because when we go to organizations and companies and all of that, we are also facing questions that are not necessarily good questions, or sometimes are like kind of racist also, or like that we're facing a lot of adversity. So do you have any like advice for us as practitioners to go on?
It's really good question. That's what I keep asking myself. Well, first, if you take care of yourself, I think it's a good start. Um, Maybe I'll say what helps me. What helps me, because I also feel this anxiety, is to take some distance with the topics. When I take my hat of a researcher, I'm just a researcher, and this is the topic I'm research on, and that protected me for a long time. But sometimes in certain spaces, especially with racialized people, women, and so on, where everyone knows what we're talking about, well, sometimes it can be emotional. But in all white spaces where I'm also, it protects me. Okay, so maybe take a psychological distance with the topic. And I don't know if it's the case for you, but I meet more and more allies, more and more people who are sensitive to that topic. Most of the time, when an organization invites you, it's because one person said your name, and that one person, you can rely on what that one person, you are there for them and with them, and it can protect you also. And in some discussions, uh, you will find your way. I'm sure you already have find your way to reply to those racist comments. How to reply to that, making the other one doubting about what he said, what she said, what they said. Just sometimes asking silly questions. Why do you say that? Do you know all black people? All gay people? you know Sometimes being just naive, you know and that sometimes works when you are facing some people who are questioning what you say. And the ultimate thing is maybe choosing the spaces and leaving the spaces that harms you.
Yeah.
That's why what I say more and more to patients. Maybe a few years ago, I was like, no, we have to fight, Now I know our health is a unique capital, And if you take it, if you lose it, you lose it forever. So you have to take it. You have to take care of it. So if the organization is harmful to you, just leave. Okay, and that's difficult to some patients because they really identify with the organization, maybe it's prestigious or whatever. For me, your health is more important. If you are able to work in that organization, you have something in you, and you will be able to work elsewhere. Where you'll be where you will be welcome. So you have to choose. Okay. So I hope that I give you some insight.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jama, and thank you, Raki, so much. Time is up for the session. I want to offer the possibility for people to take a break, of course, and be back by 11:40. But if that's okay, Raki, we also have one last question in the chat that I would love to have your opinion on. How does that sound?
Okay, go ahead.
Amazing, thank you. So, how do you think the psychological first aid training can be helpful in the workplace? For instance, ensuring that offices have psychological first aiders. Would those training have intersectional lens? So around those toolkits for mental health, like for instance, NGOs sometimes have people that you can refer to whenever there's a mental health thing that is happening to you within the workplace. I believe this is what we are referring to with first mental health aiders. What do you think of those?
Sorry, I'm reading the question at the same time. Psychological first aid. Those people are mobilized when something happens in an organization, right?
Exactly.
Would those training have intersectional lens? I don't think so. I don't think so. They may be useful, I think, yes, but I'm not sure they have the intersectional lens. I'm not sure they have the racial topics in mind because until now, intersectionality, discrimination, racism are not topics that are really digged into in psychological studies in France. I don't know in the other countries, but in France it's not really the case. So maybe it can be helpful, but they don't have the full picture. So also, I don't know.
Yeah.
Mm.
Thank you so much for your answer, Aki. Thank you, thousand thanks for accepting the invitation. It was such a pleasure to listen to you, listen to your session, and I am so grateful to keep on learning more about your work. As I said earlier, for the other speakers, people, please go to Raki's social medias, with her LinkedIn, Instagram, check her website. She's doing incredible work, and I think we would all benefit from learning from you. So thank you again so much. We come back at 11:40. This time, I think I'm right with the time, for the last session of the day, which will be the future of DEI. Please take 5 minutes and see you in a bit.
Thank you so much.
How are you both doing?
Hi.
So,
Nice to see you both. I think Antonio will be joining in a second. I believe he's already in the call.
Hi, Safir. I'm here. It's just that I can't activate my camera.
No worries.
No, I mean, I can. It's just that you disabled it earlier, so I can't activate it again.
Oh, really? How?
Yeah.
Hold on, I'm gonna check that more. Is it working now?
Awesome.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Sorry for that. Wonderful. So we have one more minute before we start. We can all breathe in together and breathe out. And hopefully we are ready to start our conversation. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a nice little break. Sorry, it's a bit shorter because we have so many interesting things to say. But we are back for the last session of this day, where we're going to be speaking about the future of DEI. The first panelist we have is Antonio Vega, he, him pronouns. Antonio, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes. Thank you, Safir. Hi, everyone. My name is Antonio. I use the pronouns he, him. I run a DEI company called Includership. I've been in the DEI space for, I think, around 11 years. At the moment, I'm also in the middle of my PhD. I am studying a PhD in behavioral economics, and I focus on fundraising for the queer community. So my goal is to understand who donates to the LGBT organizations around the world and why. So that's my full 4th year project, which is quite interesting. And I'm connected right now from Tulum, Mexico. So apologies if I'm not super sharp. It's 5:40 a.m. here. So yeah, but really happy to be here with all of you.
Anthony, thank you so much for the commitment and for waking up so early for us. We really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Second panelist we have today is Floria. Floria, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yes, sure. Hello, everyone that joined this lovely webinar today. I'm happy to be here. I'm, as well as Antonio, I'm a DEI consultant. I'm in the industry for 9 years now. I'm based in Berlin, in Germany. And 9 years ago, I started my own consultancy that is called Floria and Co.
Thank you very much, Floria. And last but not least, we have Mahmoud. Mahmoud, would you like to say a couple of words about yourself?
So, hi everyone. My name is Mahmoud. I'm from Egypt. I'm based in Madrid. I'm also a DI consultant. I work with multiple organizations in Spain and all over Europe. Also, a lot of civil society organizations in Brussels. I collaborate a lot with basically the anti-racism movement here in Madrid, where we try to push for different changes related to specifically connected to migration and in general related to anti-racism, and also part of a queer Arab collective who are trying also to fight against pinkwashing and stuff like that. So happy to be here.
Thank you so much, Mahmoud. And I am not going to introduce myself, but I am also a DI consultant, so I might be jumping in this panel a bit more than in the previous one. Let's start off with a very, very difficult question. Floria, I'd love to hear from you. When you look 5 years ahead, what do you think DI work will look like compared to today?
Yes, it's a great question actually, because it allows us to also get back to why we actually started this work and to connect to our core values. And I think it's not wishful thinking, but more optimism that it will gain more and more importance in organizations, but in more nuanced ways that really tackle specific issues. And even 9 years ago until now, people don't fully understand the abbreviation DENI. What do these letters even stand for? And many things have been lumped together into one thing. And my hope and my wish is also that this is our chance now to break this work down into nuanced solutions, because now it sits nowhere and everywhere, and we will work at the core. So to give you an example, organizations that now invest into DEI, also in Germany, there's a tough economic situation for 3 years now. And those who do invest, they want sharp investigations of what the core issue is. And we do that by data analysis, for example, qualitative interviews, quantitative interviews, and to understand the issues. Is it more of a D topic? Is it more of an E topic or an I topic? I don't know. But we work on these problems that we find out based on our data analysis. And I think that is something that we will see more and more. Also, with the help of international standards, for example, since 2021, there's the ISO standard 30415 to be precise, and it's some people don't think it's very sexy. I thought that too. But it's actually a really helpful tool to break these three letters down and to understand the nuances of the three letters. And I think that is what we will see in 5 years, which is eventually starting now and will be continued.
Thank you so much, Floria. I put the abbreviations in the chat as well if anybody wants to check them
Sure.
because
Thanks.
I personally
Yeah.
could never remember that orally.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I find it very, very interesting that you have optimism as well. And this is something that I also personally share because I think it's very clear that once you have tested DEI, it's really hard to go back. And so employees also know now better what they deserve at work, what are their rights. So I think we can think about DEI as this economical aspect, but it's also at the end of the day also about how people feel, their psychological safety and so on. So I really, really appreciate your input. I think it's really nice. I'm so sorry if there's noise behind. My office is very noisy today. Ah, perfect. Thank you. Mahmoud, I would love to hear from you as well.
So just to recap the question, is like, where do I see DI going, right?
Where do you see DI in 5 years?
In 5 years specifically. Okay. I think like I agree a lot with you and Florian, a lot of points. I also think that considering the current geopolitical situation between the EU and the United States, I'm hoping for kind of like a schism or a separation between the trend of just following whatever the US does, specifically also with the counter trends, like where we're seeing, for example, the effect of Trump on the work of DEI in Europe in that sense. So I'm hoping that with that separation or potential separation between the two, that this would change a lot. I do think that currently we're seeing a sort of as Gloria, you mentioned it, like the change of what also like DI means and what it entails and what kind of work it does actually within organizations, because as you said, it's right now all over the place and whatnot. So getting to concrete, specific transformational services and actions, I think, is kind of like the direction that we're heading towards. And at the same time, I think, like, for example, to add as well to maybe like civil society space, I think with the shrinking of the civic space in the EU, I think there is also a trend of questioning as well, like who are we representing? And we're seeing some organizations, not all of course, but some organizations that even questioning like how decolonial their work is. Like I think, like, for example, if you go to Oxfam's Instagram right now, you're gonna see so many posts about decoloniality, which is a very interesting shift, I think. So I think we're in a process of a lot of reflection and change of strategy. With some of our organization, we're seeing, like a lot of like going back and removing actions, which again connected to what you were saying, and this, I think like this potentially might backfire with their employees because they got the taste of something. But also we're seeing some organizations that are doubling down or questioning how to be more strategic with things. So I do think that the work of DEI is going to become better, and I'm hoping it would become even more integrated into the going beyond basically, like, for example, in organizations, HR and whatnot, and hopefully stepping into more transformational leadership actions and strategy of the entire organization. But what I'm fully hoping for, but I don't know if this would happen in 5 years, is a full transformation of also like, or empowering of protection, the actions of organizing within organizations, which we can speak about more in a bit. But like, I feel like this is something that a lot of the times when we're talking about DI, I think we kind of forget the importance of questioning how organizations are even structured in first place. And because in my opinion, they're authoritarian structures in of themselves, many of them the hierarchical ones, which need to be questioned how they are even functioning in first place. But anyways, I'm gonna stop here.
Thank you, Mahmoud. Please don't spoil the whole talk.
Yeah.
You're going to be diving into a lot of those topics afterwards. Floria, you unmute yourself. You wanted to add something, maybe? No worries. Antonio, then please go ahead. What is your idea of what DI is going to look like in 5 years' time?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it's very exciting to think or what to wish or what to create in 5 years. And I agree with both of you, with Mahmoud and Floria. And I see definitely space for us in the DI space to reframe or rephrase certain DEI terms, and I think to make it what it works for us, for your DI practice, for your region in the world, for your type of client, to adopt it. I think in the past, most of us or some of us, we were just adopting US centric based DEI terms, and I think it's super exciting now that we're somehow a little bit more allowed, quote unquote, in because with everything that's happening, DI has been weaponized by certain leaders, by certain organizations and countries, and so on. So I think it's that freedom to rephrase and rethink what DI means or what we want to keep from DI. In my example, for example, I kept the name of my consultancy as Includership because I believe a lot of inclusion, and that's my fundamental work with organizations. But from that, I stem a lot of the DI concept, but I just focus on the inclusion part on the talk, on the day-to-day things. I also see DI as stopping to be a standalone PR exercise or HR exercise. I see it as an integrated audit of outcomes in organizations. And in here, I want to mention an author and a DA strategist that most of you might know. Their name is Lily Seng. Lily released a book last week. It's called Fixing Fairness, something like that. I'm sorry, I don't remember the full name of the book. And it's a little bit interesting. It might be a bit controversial, their name, the content of this book, because what Lily proposed here is that they propose a new DI term, which they call FAIR. Instead of DI, they call it FAIR. And FAIR stands for fairness, access, inclusion, and representation. And what Lily says here is that it'd be better for organizations and DI strategies to use terms for the global majority instead of using and adopting niche accommodations. And it might work for some people, it might not work for others. Just I think we were going to be seeing these authors and people and like everyone here that we can come up with our theories and papers and things like that. So definitely, yeah, it's an opportunity for us to create and instead of adopting things that were created for us.
Super interesting, thank you. And I love that debate because there's a lot of debate happening with whether we use DEI or not, right? Since the executive order in January 2025 that Trump started, where DEI became very vilified in the US and then eventually also in Europe and in a lot of parts of the world, and where a lot of people were thinking, do we actually just rename? Do we keep on doing the work, but we change the name? And other people were saying, no, actually, we have to stand strong. This is also one of the things that the fascist organizations also do, to have a self-censor. So it's a very interesting question that you're opening right here. From there, I would like to ask, which part of current DEI practice do you think will then not be any viable any longer or any credible? Mahmoud, would you like to answer that first?
So I think like this will change with time. First of all, I think like what we're seeing right now because of the current geopolitical trends, we're seeing that, for example, the performative action, meaning actions that are fully created to just show, like, oh, I'm committed to diversity and inclusion, but I'm not actually doing, the actual core work. Like, for example, like doing public events or funding, for example, specific actions through corporate social responsibility and whatnot. Like, we're seeing that all of this is decreasing a lot, specifically in multinationals. Which, in my opinion, I think it's not necessarily a bad thing. Obviously, it is challenging, specifically when it comes to funding specific organizations and whatnot. Which again there's the whole challenge with funding for the third sector right now. But I think at the same time, it is getting companies to think as well more internally. Even those a lot of organizations, for example, that I work with, that want to maintain the work that they're doing in DEI, they're now trying to, instead of doing things outward facing, they're moving towards doing things that are more inward facing. And I think that this process is leading to a shift on what is considered a good DEI strategy and what is not considered DEI strategy. But at the same time, I think there is also a trend of going towards less thought-provoking actions, in the sense of like right now with some companies, like they're in the conversations about, for example, doing different sessions or audits or whatnot. They sometimes explicitly tell me, "Oh, but can you please not mention anything that might generate or might be perceived as problematic or controversial," and getting to the point of explicitly saying something like that, or trying to kind of like censor specific things before the of being shared within the organization is definitely something that is important. At the same time, I work as well with a lot of ERG, employee resource groups, these volunteer groups that are created within organizations to kind of like work on the inclusion of specific groups. Sometimes they have budgets, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're fully just volunteer and that's it. So working with different ERG groups, I'm seeing as well that there is a trend of control, of trying to control, like basically looking at all the events that they're doing. Who are you inviting? Why are you inviting this person? Where before it was more lax. It was more like, okay, you can do activities, and the company did not interfere that much. So I think all of this is very interesting. So on one side, there's the shift towards things that are more internal, and leaving performative action. And there is, and I think this might be a good trend because it can lead to more transformative actions and focus on training and audits and internal things. But at the same time, we're seeing this overt control of the actions that are being done, which can be counterproductive in many ways for the change. So yeah.
Super interesting. Thank you so much, Mahmoud. Antonio, would you like to add something to that?
Yeah, I fully second what Mahmoud is saying. I think we have research where we can see that performative DEI actions don't have any effect on 60% of workers in organizations, right? So I think we all have seen these awareness panels where some organizations, they just use it as a duct tape for masking systemic and broken systems. And I think it's where we can see like having something is not always better than than nothing, right? And for me, what I see won't be happening anymore, it won't be viable anymore in DI, is having it as free, as being run by the marginalized workers and marginalized the overworked volunteers, and which most of the time, to be honest, whatever we can do or they do is just a 60-minute workshop every 3 months or something like that, because they are really overworked. They're the people sharing the traumas, paying the tokenized and so on. And I think we can touch a little bit more on that later. So I see DI as the paid function and the high standardized professional function in companies, where yes, they can change the environment and at the same time keep changing mindsets.
Absolutely. Floria, I think you have something to add, and you also agree quite a lot with the both of them, right?
Yes, I do agree a lot. And which also makes me very happy that especially marginalized people who were the involuntary DEI officers at times, they will more and more empower themselves and don't do that anymore, because it has even become more exhausting to do this kind of work. So now I think everyone understands that this is a paid job, for an entire team in an organization of thousands of people, for example. But a trend that I'm also seeing is that people ask, where do you stand in terms of democracy? I've seen that last year happening in Germany, so where I'm based in Berlin, that they were asking, hey, okay, you have this interesting talk, but can you add something about the importance of democracy? And I actually really liked that one because our work has ever been political, but some people have pretended that it's not political, but now it's the decision. Is it really accepted as a political work? And do we stand behind our basic law in Germany, or we're on the other side? Yeah, whatever that means. And that is something that I really like because I also have interesting numbers from The Economist that are, on the one hand, also really shocking because only less than half of the world's population live in a democracy of some sort, and only 6.6 reside in a full democracy. And there has been a decline from 12.5 in 2014. So only half. So 6.6% of the world's population live in a full democracy, and Germany falls under that. The US, it has been changed. But that these things that are happening outside of your office door, that these things are finally being seen, or they actively choose to ignore it and to hop on the trend of, okay, let's not do DEI anymore. Yeah, so I think, yeah, it will be there's this two sides of things, people who are staying with the work, investing in it even if it's a low budget thing because of the economy, or yeah, they have never meant it seriously and they're abandoning it.
Thank you very much. I often say in my trainings that DEI is really a lot of things, and one of
Yeah.
the core aspect of DEI is that it's multidisciplinary, right? We do politics, we do sociology, we do psychology, we do business, we do XYZ. So I love that you're speaking about that, and I love that organizations that you work with already start to understand it a bit better. Yes, of course, we're going to speak about human rights. Yes, of course, we're going to speak about politics in our training, because at the end of the day, in my humble opinion, but we'll be looking at it a bit further, DEI is part of human rights. Workers' rights are part of human rights. So I find it very interesting. Thank you so much, Florian. So what could we add to our future DI practices to make them more efficient and also more sustainable? Antonio, please, would you like to start?
Yeah, I think it's a quite a difficult one because organizations and us um, not always have the agency or the freedom to make things efficient. Sometimes we're calling in companies just to fix one thing that an organization can see. For me, the answer to this would be around thinking and designing processes, DI processes or work that fix exclusion before that happens. And here I want to say an example that happened to me on an organization that I got hired to sort of convince or teach managers to be more fair with their promo process. So this company wanted me to design a series of trainings and workshops to convince and show managers how to be process. But I told them that this was not a sustainable thing because what if this manager X leaves and we got a new manager Y and then so on. So what I proposed there was like, why don't we audit your promotion process with, do you have any rubrics that are clear with clear, standardized? Do you have any standardization on your rubrics and things like that for promotion? I think their minds were blown away with what I was suggesting. They wanted to fix people instead of looking what processes are there. Nothing was standardized. Everything was up to the manager. So the whole proposal there was, okay, let's now just do a standardized rubric process. I know they're also not perfect. I know there also can be biases and things can go wrong in standardized, promotion rubrics. But that would be it. What if we can do and design processes that fix exclusion before that happens? I think that for me would be a little bit more standardized and prepared for more efficiency in the future of the AI work.
Yeah, I love that, and I really have to, yeah, sign this because the unconscious bias training for everyone, it will hopefully disappear. And I know people offer it because it gives us the opportunity to earn money. Of course, that's connected. We also have to make a living. But I love that you pointed them into the right direction to, yeah, look at the processes and find some rubrics.
So what else, Floria, would you like to add to your future DI practice to make it more
Oh,
efficient?
so many things. But I think for this panel, I will choose the idea of an extra plus of self-care, rest, and time in community, and to not overcommit to our jobs. And also drawing from the keynote from Raki, the days are rough. We live in times of so-called polycrisis, so we are bombarded by bad news every day, and our work is deeply political. And oftentimes we are very idealistic about our work, and we tend to invest too much of our joy and our energy into this work. So for me, to add to my future DI practice as a promise also to myself to prioritize joy, activities that nurture me, and to recognize the time and the point where I'm getting too cynical about things, because this is actually the alarm bell. When I'm getting too cynical, it's time for me to take a step back and to do things that don't have anything to do with DEI.
And I second that so much. Thank you so much. And I love that you're also bringing us back to the keynote, right? Because this is also very important when we do DEI to remember we are just one person, and maybe we are leading big teams, maybe we're leading big projects, but at the end of the day, we also need to take care of that person first. Sleep correctly, try to do some sports, try to meditate, spend time with friends, families, people you love, also maybe your pets. And I think we have forgotten a bit about that because everything is so urgent, everything is a pressing matter. And I love that you're reminding us to do that. Just like take a bit of time to rest and know your alarm bells. I love that you're so self-aware. You're like, hold on, if I'm too cynical, probably I should rest. And I'm sure all of us have some of those. So I think it's really cool to share that with us. Thank you so much, Floria. Mahmoud, what would you like to add?
So I think I would add a number of things. So there is this paper that I love that I'm going to share in the chat. It's written by this professor called Dylan Rodriguez, and he talks about the NGO industrial complex. Basically, he talks about how NGOs, because of their dependency on the system of power through funding, through sometimes even like what actions would be accepted and whatnot, and the desire to self-sustain as opposed to tackle the issue itself, or provide solutions that fully resolve the issue, they end up being part of the system, and they become a digestible form of resistance, co-opting basically forms of resistance into the system. And I mentioned this because I think it's incredibly relevant for DI work, because I think like we need to remember as well that DI actually stems from social justice movements, right? So I think it's important to see the co-optation that has happened and is happening by corporations and organizations, by them basically stepping in and saying, oh, I'm going to do it. I'm going to work on ESGs. I'm going to create a CSR department. I'm going to create a DI department. But to understand that this is a form of, again, digestible or bite-sized forms of resistance that the organizations create in order to limit the possibility of other forms of resistance, namely through, for example, unions or forms of organizing that can actually force organizations to actually implement change. And we see that organizations that have actually implemented, true change and actually provided, workers' rights and stuff like that are usually organizations that have been pushed to that through the unions, not because they're beautiful organizations. There are actually multiple studies that are coming in specifically related to investment that show that organizations that say or have ESG metrics or actions or whatnot actually perform worse on ESG than organizations that do not. So, but at the same time, they're attracting all of this money from investors that supposedly care about, ESG and whatnot. So there's an incredible paradox as well where we're seeing this. And in addition to all of this, something that I'm sorry, I'm drawing a very negative picture, but like I'm gonna stem from there to kind of like go answer the question. But like what we're seeing as well, like a trend as well, is very, I think, negative, is the creation of so many different structures of awards that literally companies pay for in order to be able to be on the top whatever list or going to a specific event or whatnot, which adds to this performative action, this shell of like, oh, I'm doing the work and I'm not doing the work. And on top of all of that, we're seeing the crazy, I cannot find a better word to use in this context, use of AI that is basically entering all aspects of companies, right? So we're seeing, for example, the uses of AI when it comes to hiring, doing interviews, even like performance evaluations. Like so many decisions are being made within organizations now using AI, and it's incredibly biased. Like the more I'm learning about how the different models and algorithms are used in these AI tools, the more I learn of how incredibly biased these tools are are in so many ways, because they first of all, they're using data based on bias. The mathematical systems that they're using or automatically would lead to bias. So it's like it's fully wrong. So basically, what I would add, and I'm working on adding to my DI services, is how to transform auditing from going simply to people management, but how to audit these incredibly complex tools, because they're being increasingly used in organizations. And even regulations like the EU AI Act, for example, even though that it supposedly forces companies to kind of justify their actions or like the decisions that are being made, we're seeing, for example, like so many people are getting for example, their like their job applications get rejected, but they have no idea why they got rejected. And sometimes you don't even get notified that the evaluation was being done by AI, which is supposedly by law they should be notified. So we're stepping into an era where there is incredible dependency on AI, which I think is going to shift a lot how work is being done, because we need to go towards how to analyze these incredibly complex tools, and not simply to analyze how humans are making decisions, because we're seeing a downward trend of depending on humans to actually make those decisions.
Absolutely.
So yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Thank you
Sorry
so
for
much,
the long
Mahmoud.
picture.
Two things. First, I'm so impressed that you managed to talk, be present, and also send the link in the chat for those who have not seen. Very impressive. Congratulations. Second, I love the fact that you're starting to speak about AI as well, and that leads us to the next question. And I'd love to hear Floria on that regarding what forces will most influence the future of DEI, whether organizations accept it or not. Maybe economical, maybe social or political. I don't know where you want to take your answer towards.
I mean, it's influenced by all of these forces, but I think the most pressing one is that times are getting rougher. We're seeing that with the election of Trump and the executive orders that you mentioned, and tactics of the far right that are also very present in Europe and undermining our work. And we are operating in an international environment that is increasingly favorable to populism, authoritarianism, and traditional democratic parties are continuing to lose influence. So this is something that I'm also worried about, but especially when I'm speaking for Germany, we have a very good basic law actually, and it was designed back in the days as a direct response to the human rights abuses and the Holocaust, Shoah, etc., by the Nazi era. So it is built upon principles that you could even, and I've heard a historian talking about it, Jürgen Zimmerer. He is analyzing German colonialism colonial presence in Namibia, for example. And he mentioned that this is actually a very woke document, yeah, our constitution, the basic law, because it has a strong emphasis on human rights, equality, and social justice. And parts of me have hope that this document will help us, because the AfD in Germany, the far-right party here, that is gaining importance and voters, that it will help because it was created for this very reason. And yeah, and I hope also for every DEI practitioner in organizations to understand that they are also part of this. Yeah, democracy is shaped by us as citizens as well. So to engage. If there's time, if there's energy, I know that is highly political and depends on privileges that you have also. But if you have, please educate yourselves also on that specific topic, and if you can engage in those, if you can elect people right to the people representing you and all these things. I think these will become more and more important. So to add this nuance of activism, maybe. And then for a company leader to also understand that now's not the time to pretend that you are unpolitical, because what is that even? As a company, you're never unpolitical. And you can decide the side that you choose. And you should.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that, Floria. I completely agree. I love what you're speaking about because you started speaking about the far right, and I think one thing that has happened, and one of the reasons why the main parties like the left and the right have become so obsolete is that they have not really considered the whole population, unfortunately. And we've seen the far right seducing everyone. The far right is talking to elder generations, the far right is talking to the current workers, and the far right is talking to children also. And I think that's something that I find very interesting because you see the far right being very successful both in France, in Germany, also in Spain, in the UK, on TikTok, a platform that people have neglected for such a long time because they didn't deem it so relevant. They were thinking that Facebook and Instagram is more relevant, but Facebook and Instagram comes with some limits. Its users base is a bit older than that of TikTok. So I find it interesting, and you see that when the left is actually using those same platforms, they eventually start to grow back. And you've seen Die Linke in Germany do that, you've seen the left in France do that, and the left in France managed to do that so well that they even won elections last year in June. Unfortunately for us, French president decided that those elections were not relevant after he actually even called them. But the left should have been in the government and should have had a prime minister thanks to those elections. So it's very interesting to see how it changes. I also see one thing influencing is the fact that Europe has an aging population. Fertility rate is very, very low everywhere, which means that Europe needs migration. Europe needs migration for healthcare. Europe needs migration for every single aspect of our societies. And I find it very interesting to see how, or to think of how it's going to influence us, because we even think about Italy, who is led by the far-right party, who even after having built a whole campaign on the fact that migrants were the problem, now is asking migrants to come to Italy because it's not viable to actually not have people who are migrating. So yeah, I find it very interesting to see how we really have a duty to do better, to organize better, and to collaborate better to make sure that we're not forgetting any citizens. Because when we look at politics, we are here to serve, not here to lead. It's a position of service. So it's important to remind ourselves, how do we serve all people? Mahmoud, would you like to add something maybe to that question?
So the factors that are, that would affect DEI, sorry, in the future. So I think I think there are so many factors that you already spoke about, like migration and whatnot, that I think definitely is going to impact a lot. I think also we are at a time like connected to that where we're seeing countries that are going to be one of the first to have to deal with the extreme effects of an aging population, like South Korea, for example, right? Like it's within our lifetimes that we're going to see what's going to happen with that country. So I think like it's an interesting time to see how South Korea, like the government, is going to deal with this, but also like how that might impact nations to react to things. I do think as well, like definitely technology has a huge impact on how things are going to be done in the future. And I think it's very much related to the aging population, because we're also seeing the great threat of AI taking a lot of the jobs that are available in the market, and the dependency on AI, which some might argue would increase the productivity of each individual worker, which in turn might decrease decrease the need for having the same amount of workers to sustain the social securities that are present in Europe. So there's also, I think, like there is a counter trend to necessarily the need for migration. It's not happening at the same rate, obviously, and also there are still jobs that are maybe like still require humans for them to be done. But even like in jobs like, for example, doctors, we're finding a lot of AI tools that even doing diagnosis. They're still administered with human supervision. But even jobs that we might have seen as safe, let's say, we're seeing also the downward trend for their availability in that sense. So I think there are a lot of factors that are impacting how this is being administered, but at the same time, I think we're also seeing the erosion of democratic principles and elements and bases. And I think that this, even though it might go kind of towards at the beginning, I do think they might actually do a detour or kind of like go back, and we might find more push for organizing and whatnot. Because, for example, if we see all the actions that has been done against, for example, the Palestinian movement and whatnot, specifically in countries like Germany, what this led to, or the UK, for example, well, what this leads to is also like a questioning of the democratic basis that allow for political participation in general, whether within the public sphere or the private sphere or at work. And I think like we're going to see the impacts of these new institutions on everyday life, and how what would be the counter or the response to this erosion of the democracy that we're seeing in multiple European countries. But at the same time, I see this in a sense as in a hopeful way, because I think like when people notice the erosion of such spaces and rights, I'm hoping that people would be impulsed or pushed to organize more and push for more. And I'm a great believer in the power of organizing. I believe, for example, that the work of DEI it needs to be pushed not just through services that are offered to organizations, but through collective actions, through unionizing, through working together to pushing the government to install laws that push for different actions to be done by organizations. Here in Spain, for example, they just passed a law last year, if I'm not mistaken, related to companies having to have an LGBTQ plus plan focusing on transgender individuals. And even though the plan is honestly vague, it doesn't have it just tells you you can create your own plan. It doesn't have concrete numbers, for example, or anything like that in comparison, for example, to the gender equality plan that also companies with more than 50 employees here in Spain have to have. But it is a step. It is a step that has been pushed for by unions. It's a step that has been pushed for by organizing and whatnot. And now you're getting a lot more companies beyond just multinationals to actually start implementing actions towards the inclusion of LGBTQ plus community, right? So I do believe that we need to kind of move the needle towards more organizing and shifting, and not just focus DEI on the service-based element, because we need to understand, also connecting this with ERGs, like a lot of people, for example, push a lot for ERGs being paid or getting getting budgets, or for individuals to have specific jobs within the organizations. I think that this obviously is important, but at the same time, I think we need to understand that this risks that people get integrated within that system where they are, meaning that they become basically following the priority of the company as opposed to challenging the company at large. And I think there needs to be an upward trend of protecting organizing within companies, which I don't think it's fully protected by law. Supposedly is protected, in practice is not truly protected in Europe, where we're seeing a lot of people that have been fired because they spoke up about X, Y, or Z in multiple companies across Europe. And I think DEI, an element of it, needs to move towards protecting specific laws and actions, or specific, let's say, laws that protect the possibility of action. And I think that this is something that people beyond just specific group can go behind. So I think in general there needs to be a lot more movement building, and I think we're going towards that, maybe slower than I hope to, but I do think that we're moving a lot towards movement building that challenges the application of laws that supposedly are already written. But yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mahmoud. Antonio, would you like to add something? We've talked about so many things, so if you prefer to answer the next questions, I'm also so happy. Let me know.
I do want to add something. Taking the advantage that I'm doing research on behavioral economics for marginalized communities, and I want to speak about the economic forces. When you do research on economics, it's almost nothing or impossible or so little to find data on how marginalized communities play a role in companies and in societies. So even though we can't find this data because it's not there, because marginalized communities are not that important, or they're so small, or things like that, I truly believe that companies, they can't ignore anymore the talent pool and the richness that comes with marginalized communities. So, sorry, someone is speaking. If companies fail to create a fair and inclusive and environment, they will lose this talent. So I read an article that was done for North America that they mentioned that 82% of people in companies values the work on fairness and diversity. So economically speaking, if companies want to be successful, they need to differentiate themselves with actual impact in diversity and inclusion. Rather than just keep showing your empty communications on DEI when special months come, during the year, or more rainbow washing. And I want to briefly say an example of one of these cases. I'm based in Dublin, Ireland, and the standard of Irish companies around DEI is that everything is grand, that everything is okay, and whatever they do on top of this is a little extra to have on DEI. I just finished working with a company for 1 year, and I was called in to gather data and to measure their DEI work, to be able to transform it into words or into reports for their employees. And this request came from their employees. They wanted to officially and formally read what the company was doing in DEI. So the company said, okay, we're going to do this as a retention mechanism. So I came to the work to do that. Halfway through the process, they realized that their competitors, this is a chemical engineering company, their competitors don't publish anything around diversity and inclusion on their websites. So the word was on the street that my client, this company, they were quite good at diversity and inclusion. So we were like thinking, okay, now your employees are going to be well informed about DI. Why don't we publish this on our website? What economic implications this will have, right? Directors and VPs, they were quite scared that publishing this outside online, it will be used against them by their competitors, because we were going to be publishing what went wrong what things have not worked for this company and where they are failing or where they need, we call it needs improvement on them. But I think the final agreement was like, if we're doing this, we're going all in. Like, if you want to be on this space and you're gonna do this for attraction and retention, it has to be all or nothing. So economically speaking, we can't ignore this. The marginalized talent that is, the talent that is within marginalized communities.
Wow, so interesting. I had never really considered that aspect. Thank you so much for sharing, Antonio. Um, that leads us to my favorite question of the panel. I hope it's going to be interesting for everyone. And I'd love to ask Floria first. How do you see the relationship between DEI, democracy, and human rights evolving in the coming years? We've been speaking about that quite a lot today, so I'm sure you will have something very interesting to say.
Yeah, we have the big topics today, right? So I'm hoping to also give some practical tools in the Q&A later, because I really want for people to take away things into the daily DI practice. But yeah, how can I combine these three big concepts? DI, democracy, human rights, they are all connected. But what we've seen throughout the panel and what we are observing is that liberal democracies, they are under pressure, and so human rights as well, and DEI as well. So, but the good news is that these things, they don't just happen, and they're lived through everyday choices, participation, the courage to speak up when it matters, be it in the office or on a bigger political level. And the thing is, our brains, and I love that Angelina talked about that earlier, that she's educating their children in psychology. Our brains are still in a state where they divide people in an us versus them. This is an automatic thing. It happens that we divide people into in and out groups. And it's also connected to whether we have more empathy for them. And we see that happening with migrants, for example, as a big out group and no empathy for them. So, for example, and we can work on that idea that we educate ourselves on our brains. Our brains are wired that way, but if we understand that our brains work that way, we can also work towards the bigger goal of maybe overcoming that shift, because there's very interesting research by Dr. Leah Yu, the concept of neuropolitics. And Leah Yu, she's a researcher at the Columbia University. And this book is very interesting. And she combines these two things, the layer of the brain and our us versus them thinking that is automatic, and our biased brains, of course, and politics. So our brains are highly biased and we're walking through that world. But how does this shape us and shape our political decisions and shape our thoughts about human rights? And if we can work on this level through education and awareness, it will help the entire planet, so to say. And I think that book was really inspiring for me, that there's the direct connection of how my brain works and how everyone's brain works to democracy. So please go read her book. But I think we can bring more awareness to that connection. And also companies who are offering unconscious bias trainings can bring in this layer of that we're not only biased, but what does that mean on a political level? And by doing that, we are shaping the world of tomorrow. Yeah, thank you for sharing.
Thank
Yeah,
you so much. I appreciate your participation so much, and I find it very interesting to also remember that it's also sometimes science, right? It's not just it's not
yes.
just about sociology, it's not just about it's also science. The sociology, sorry, is also at some point was part of psychology, so it's interesting
Yeah.
to hear about it. Antonio, please, would you like to add something? How would you see that
Yeah,
relationship evolving?
yeah, and I'm very dreamy, very optimistic about this. Um, I can see DI being the sort of savior for democracy and human rights. For me, organizations and companies are a reflection of what society is, and sometimes we can see these companies as a microcosmos. So imagine that we manage to do DEI the best we can within a company, how that gets reflected into society. Sometimes when I have people in my trainings in DEI, I always tell them, take this work with you, share with the people who was not in this room. Um, and I'm from Mexico. That's a country where human rights are almost not existent. But other countries they have human rights as the floor, right? As a minimum that they can have. And sadly, it's not the case here in Mexico. So when I'm dreaming about this in my DI work and the DI work that we all do here, I see this as sort of ceiling what is the our aspirational things that we can do for society and for companies to move us um, forward in social progress and so on. So I mean, it's kind of my dream for me how to connect all this with DI. I don't know, it's too vague, but it's like this is what I dream.
We love a dreamy person. Please never kill your dreams. Thank you so much, Antonio. Mahmoud, would you like to add something as well to this relationship between DI, democracy, and human rights?
Well, I think you all said it very well. I think the only thing that I would add is I'm hoping that the connection between or our ideas of democracy might challenge us to question the structures of organizations themselves, in the sense of understanding what is the realm of possibility or the realm of participation decision making of the organizations that we work in, which I hope would transform the way we create organizations in the first place. Like we're seeing, for example, like different corporatives that are coming up and whatnot and being very successful. Like for example, Mondragon, the biggest corporative in the world and whatnot. I'm hoping that through the integration of democracy or democratic ideals within organizations themselves and the right for workers to own their work and the right for workers to challenge the structure of their organization, that DI would get even further transformed, and it would create also, as Antonio said, for example, at Floria, like it would create this link of also understanding that through exclusion we erode the element of democracy itself and the participation, and the possibility of maintaining the society that we want alive. So I'm saying like this continuous relationship, but it requires challenging the systems that have been set in place for a long time. So, which is not necessarily an easy task. But yeah.
Thank you all so much. I'd love to ask you the very last question of this panel. We've been speaking about long term, we've been speaking about midterm. I would love to speak also about short term because at the end of the day, present is the only time that we have. So I would love to ask you if organizations want their DI work to remain relevant, what is one commitment they need to start making today? Antonio, please, would you like to start?
I have three words for that is radical data transparency. I always encourage companies and people to do this, to just be transparent with your data. I know it's really fearful, I know it's really difficult, but like I think we all are tired of just reading demographics. We have 52% women and that's it, that's my DA work in a huge company. Like how is that possible? Share the outcomes of every process that you have, from hiring to pay to promote to retention, and stop hiding from these good intentions of your little sharing out there. So data transparency, share your raw outcomes, even if they fail, share why people are not answering your internal surveys and share your theory or your hypothesis. It's maybe because your employees don't trust you. They don't trust what you're gonna do with their answers and with the data. So in the short term, if companies want to have a commitment, is to share data transparency and create this win-win. Why don't you share how marginalized communities in your company have been benefited from clear career paths, or how the flexible work has affected positively or negatively to your racialized and employees and so on. Share all that, please. That's my wish for this commitment for in the short term for companies.
Thank you, Antonio. Mahmoud, what would be one commitment for you?
I think the commitment for me, it's a bit of a repetition, but it is working on the element of organizing and how to protect organizing in different organizations. And because I feel it's the basis of any true sustainable change, collective action, whether it's from inside or outside the organization.
Thank you. And Florida, what would be one of your commitments?
I second all of yours. I especially love the data one. We need to do that more. But I would say even before we jump to the data part, I suggest that organizations have to become very clear about their why. Why are we doing this kind of work? And to become really honest about this why, and to create that case. Which specific issues are we tackling through this work? To communicate it through the entire company. Invest in your people who want to drive this work in the organization, and have a budget. Because without the money, nothing will happen.
Yes, 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 yes. I couldn't agree more with the three of you. I think that for me, what I would love organizations to commit would be to have a long-term strategy when it comes to DEI, not just okay, we're going to do that this year, but a real calendar, 5, 10-year strategy on where are we heading, and also trust the process. Because what I've seen often with clients is that they have such strategies, but then there is one hiccup or one thing that doesn't go as planned, and then they're thinking, oh my God, we should redo absolutely everything. But most of the time, that hiccup or that mishap is part of the process as well. So trusting the process for me is so, so important. And I would really recommend everybody to go by it. I want to say thank you to the three of you. And I'd like to open the floor for some questions. We have about 5 minutes. Please raise your hands and ask your questions to our three amazing panelists. Write them in the chat if you don't feel like it. Raki, maybe you have a question? Yeah, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you for your talk. It was very, very, very insightful. I have 3 questions. I have to choose maybe one. I can maybe say my questions and you respond to whatever speaks to you. Well, the last question I had was, how do you convince companies to work with you when they don't want to work on DEI? That's a question. The other one was how to overcome the lack of funding, but maybe you have some ideas on that. And another complex question is far right is consistent through time. Well, we saw it in France, in Italy. Someone said Italy needs workers. They welcome people, immigrants in their country. And I think I have the impression that this kind of movement is come back again and again every 15, 20 years. Italy needs people, France needs people, Spain needs people. But when things go down, well, far right comes again. So they are consistent through time. How do we make DEI consistent through time? So sorry, it's three large questions. You can respond to what you like. Sorry, thank you.
Thank you, Raki. Who would like to take this one? I see Floria nodding quite a lot.
Yeah, especially the first one spoke to me because I would say there isn't the entire organization that is totally convinced. It's always, let's say, a group of 10 people or even less, who have done quite some internal work before they reach out to us. They have argued for budget, etc. Because we as consultants, we have to be paid. So they reach out when they have done some internal clarification work. And then it's mostly the idea of bringing in someone externally so they have more authority. So it happens all the time that people internally have argued about things, and as soon as I'm coming in giving a talk about it, whatever, or we're doing a workshop or we're doing an audit, an analysis, and suddenly things start to change because as an outsider I have another perspective and maybe people trust me more. I don't know, authority bias maybe as well. And then things start to change. Yeah. But overall, it's a very complex process because as soon as you go into a company, not everyone is convinced. You have one training with management, for example, and then you convince another one, or you get full pushback, and yeah, everything can happen.
Thank you, Floria. Mahmoud, Antonio, would you like to answer any of the other questions that Raki had?
Yeah, very briefly, something that has worked and helped me is challenge what the client wants. Because, like I mentioned before, they're so fixated on what they want, and like Floria said, and they haven't realized all the things that are happening with these fresh eyes. When I challenge what they want, and is they kind of like clicks on them, like thinking, okay, he might have a point, or their team might be prepared to do something else. So for me, not following what they want immediately has helped me to win a little bit more contracts with clients by challenging from the beginning what they want.
Thank you, Antonio. Mahmoud, would you like to add something maybe?
So I'm sharing a quick study that I find very interesting related to dealing with the resistance. It's specifically focused on gender equality, but I think it's very interesting. So I'll just leave it there, just in case. I do think like related to sorry, I wanted to respond to the third question, but now I forgot the third question. Can you repeat it?
Sorry, the third question, the more complex one, maybe.
I'm happy to summarize it as well if you want, Raki.
Please go ahead.
Amazing. So Raki was saying that the far right is pretty consistent. We've seen in the past that every time a country that has a low fertility rate realizes there's a problem, they try to attract migrants, but then the second something happens, they blame it all on the migrants, and it comes back and forth, which I think resonates quite a lot with the pendulum theory that you were mentioning in a private conversation we had in the past. So the question is, how do we make sure that DEI actually stays as relevant and as consistent as the far right has been?
So it's very complex, and it's very complex to respond briefly, but I'll try my best. So basically, I think first of all, I think it's Foucault that said there is no power without resistance, and I think that you're always going to find a counter push towards any systemic shift that you want to do, or towards the ideas that you have. And I think this stems from the individual within our heads and grows within society in itself. Right? Like within you have ideas of gender equality and misogyny at the same time, but maybe you identify with one of them and then you manifest that into the world, right? So I think that resistance is a constant, but also that means that DI in itself, or the values of social justice, have been have been also a constant in the sense of that they existed in societies, that maybe the power that they held within society has shifted through time. And I think that one of the major things that is important for us to convey, specifically when it comes to democratic values, is understanding that the existence of an excluded group, a group that is not included within the concept of the population, like what we're seeing, for example, with a lot of ethnic minorities, migrants and refugees, etc., always is connected to the rise of fascism and the far right. Because basically they become a symbol that can be used to point at the issues that are happening in society. No, you saw that, for example, happening. And it's still happening, for example, nowadays with migrants and racialized individuals. We saw it happening, for example, with Jewish people, for example, in the 19th century Europe, specifically paradoxically, even after the emancipation of Jewish individuals within multiple European countries, starting with France, but then we see a whole process of pointing, at Jewish people to kind of like blame them for a lot of the ills of the time kind of thing. No, but we saw this as well with Roma people, for example. So whenever there is a group that is not being integrated as part of the collective society, this group is almost definitely going to be scapegoated into kind of like eroding the fabric of democracy within that society, and because they get blamed for the ills instead of truly understanding what are the factors that are leading to the ills of the time. So I think to sustain DEI, we have to truly question who is us, who is humanity, who is the population. And it's a question that really stems from the nascence of the nation state itself, really.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Thank you so much, Mahmoud. We have one last question in the chat. It's not addressed to anyone, so whoever wants to answer, please jump in. How can we work with companies on processes? Normally, they would do this with inside people and hire an external for one specific part of the whole project, which is not sustainable for the consistency of our practice and to measure real impact. What to do here? Some advice, please. Who would like to take this one on processes? Nobody?
I can briefly mention if I'm understanding the question correctly, and here would be also about challenging the client on what do they want with the processes that we are hired there to change. How can we tell them to make this longer? I think if we're being hired, we are the ones with a little bit more power and a veto power. No, sorry, not veto power, but more power to audit the things. So I think it's a lot up to us to suggest different path for sustainable continuation of the work. I'm sorry, Tatiana, I'm not sure if I'm understanding the question, but if someone else wants to chip in.
Yeah, I had one thought also that is very fresh, or one example from my practice. So there is this one client, and they reached out because they wanted a qualitative analysis. And we've not been, or we haven't really understood the case. So, what do you really want from us? What should the outcome, or what are your hypotheses for the qualitative analysis? So, we challenged them, and we made a workshop on the hypothesis that they had. And now we have found out that everyone is afraid that this will be another report for the shelf. And so we challenged them. We said, hey, okay, you reached out because you think another report would help you, but we are suggesting a series of change modules. Let's say we're meeting, we're setting milestones, we have regular appointments with you, and this is what we're suggesting. So if you're an external consultant, you have to create your offering in a mouth-watering way. Then, if you think that there's the right solution to work on the processes, so give them the offer that they can't resist. So if you think it's useful for them to work on the processes, what can you offer them that will make them say yes to your offering? It's also a little bit of psychological work that you have to do with clients, because if they're convinced that solution A is the thing that will help them and you're not convinced, then maybe it might work out. But it's also your part of the job to explain to them, as Antonio mentioned, to challenge what they want and to give them the options that might work better.
Absolutely, Floria. Thank you so much to the three of you for all these incredible insights. I want to remind everybody in the audience to follow the work of Antonio, Floria, and Mahmoud. Go to their social media, Instagram, LinkedIn, go to their websites, and don't forget to also follow their companies, because this is also very important to look at the work that the companies are doing. To the three of you, thank you so much for having accepted the invitation. I'm so grateful for the three of you being here and for everything that you have shared. And I say goodbye to you. Thank you all so much. And that leads us to the closing of that session, where I want to say thank you everyone for participating to the session. I am really, really grateful about having had the possibility to do that conversation, this webinar. Thank you so much to the Foundation ENAR for trusting me with all of this. Thank you so much to ENAR. Thank you so much to Equal at Work. I want to give you the possibility to scan some QR codes. I try to make it as organized as possible, so it's not too complicated. Please have a look if you're a racialized DEI practitioner. Have a look at Spark DEI. I am the chair, and I'm really, really happy to welcome anybody who feels the need to be in community in regards to their work. Have a look at Foundation ENAR if you are a company to see the work that they're doing. Have a look at ENAR Association as well. If you're an organization that wants more equality at work, please follow the work of Equal at Work. It's an initiative by ENAR. And then you can also follow me on Instagram, on LinkedIn, and my company as well, Safir Bouhafa Consulting. Have a look at my LinkedIn profile. And yeah, hopefully we get to keep on learning together. And I am so grateful for everyone that was here. I wish you a nice afternoon, and I will be saying goodbye. Bye,
Thank you so
everyone.
much, Safir.
Thank
Thank
you so
you.
much to everyone.
Thank you, Safir. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
So how do I stop recording?